Welcome, welcome. You're here at Horcruxes, Harry. Today we present to you Hermione Fleur and Daphne. Soul marks appeared on Harry age 7 and ancient bond activated forever. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1. The burning. The cupboard under the stairs smelled like old shoes and dust, and the particular kind of darkness that has never once been friendly. Harry Potter knew every inch of it. The low beam he'd stopped hitting his head on 2 years ago once he learned to duck, the broken latch on the inside that meant he had to sleep with his back against the door when Vernon was in a mood, the single crack in the wood near the floor where a sliver of kitchen light crept in at night like a secret. He was 7 years old today. He knew because Dudley had said so at breakfast, not kindly, but in that specific triumphant way that meant Dudley had gotten presents, and Harry had gotten a piece of toast, and the instruction to clean the gutters before noon. Birthday, Harry had thought, testing the word in his mouth while he ate the toast standing up. It didn't feel like a word that had anything to do with him. The gutters took 2 hours. Vernon watched from the garden with his arms folded, offering commentary about Harry's technique that was really just commentary about Harry's general existence. After that came weeding the garden, then sweeping the kitchen, then being invisible while Dudley had 3 friends over and they watched television in the living room with the volume so high the windows buzzed. By the time the sun dropped below the fence line, Harry was in the cupboard. Not sent there, he'd simply gone, because there was nowhere else that was his, even if his wasn't a good thing to be. He was almost asleep when it started. The first one hit his left wrist like someone had pressed a hot coin against the skin, sharp, sudden, gone in an instant. He sat up and cracked his head on the beam and swore quietly, then pressed his back to the door and looked at his wrist in the thin sliver of kitchen light. There was a mark there. Small. Intricate. Like a knot of silver thread had been burned into his skin, 3 loops intersecting at a central point, with a tiny open space at the center like a door. He stared at it. He'd had bruises before, scrapes, one memorable burn from a stovetop incident that hadn't been his fault despite what Vernon had told the school. This was none of those things. This was deliberate. This had the feeling of something that had always been waiting to arrive. Then his right shoulder. This one was bigger, hit harder, a flare of heat that went deep, not painful exactly, more like the sensation of a word being pressed into him in a language he hadn't learned yet. He yanked his collar aside in the dark and felt the mark with his fingers since he couldn't see it, raised slightly, warm, spreading from a central point in a shape that felt like wings, or flame, or both. He was breathing fast now. Not scared, which was strange, because he probably should have been scared. But whatever this was, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like recognition. The third one came over his heart. This one he felt throughout his entire body. Not pain, more like a bell being struck in the center of his chest, resonating outward through his ribs, his arms, his fingertips. He pressed his palm flat against his sternum and felt his heartbeat, which was fast and clear and somehow more present than it had ever been, like a drum that had found its rhythm. The mark over his heart burned the longest. And while it burned, the cupboard lit up. Not with a flame. With something under the light, a pale gold that had no source, that came from the marks themselves, all 3 of them glowing faintly in the dark like embers seen through smoke. Harry looked at his wrist, at his shoulder, pressed his palm harder against his chest. The glow pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He sat very still. Something had changed. He could feel it the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive, a pressure difference in the world around him, a sense that the air had thickened with the tension. As if something very old had opened one eye. Then the cupboard door burst open and Petunia Dursley was standing over him with her face the color of old paper. She'd seen the light. Of course she'd seen the light. It was coming through the crack in the door. "What?" she said in a voice that wasn't quite a voice at all. "What is that? What have you done?" Harry looked up at her. He held out his wrist. Not to explain, not to apologize, just because it seemed like the honest thing to do. The mark on his wrist glowed gold in the kitchen light. Petunia made a sound in the back of her throat like she'd swallowed something wrong. I didn't do anything, Harry said. Vernon. Petunia's voice cracked upward into a register Harry had only heard twice before, once during a spider incident and once when a letter had arrived from the Mason's solicitor. Vernon, come here. Vernon Dursley in a crisis defaulted to one of three modes: bluster, denial, or threats. He cycled through all three in approximately 4 minutes while Harry sat on the kitchen chair they pointed at, not an invitation, more a way to keep him stationary, and watched his uncle's face do extraordinary things. Bluster. Freakishness, that's what this is. I've said from the beginning, the boy is unnatural and I want it on record that Petunia and I have done everything. Denial. It's marker. It's ink. Petunia, get a flannel, we'll scrub it off, this is completely. Threats. You will tell me what you've done right now or so help me. I was asleep, Harry said for the third time. I was nearly asleep and they just appeared. Things don't just appear. Vernon's fist came down on the table, rattling the fruit bowl. Normal things don't. He stopped. He looked at the marks. He looked away. Harry had noticed, over the years, that the Dursleys were physically uncomfortable looking at anything they decided not to believe in. Petunia had not stopped staring. Her long neck was rigid, her hands clasped in front of her like she was trying to keep them from doing something unpredictable. There was something in her face that Harry couldn't entirely identify, fear, yes, but threaded through with something that looked almost like grief. Something old and tired and long buried. Soul marks, she said quietly. Vernon turned to her. Pet, I know what they are, Vernon. Her voice was very flat. My sister told me about them. She said they were rare. She said most people never got one in their lives. Her eyes moved to Harry's face. She got one. For your father. She said it was the most magical thing, the most magical. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. 3, she said. You have 3. I know, Harry said. You know. She stared at him. How do you know? Because 3 came. He said it simply, because it was simple. One on my wrist, one on my shoulder, one here. He pressed his hand to his chest. 3 different marks. 3 different somethings. I could feel that they were different. Petunia sat down heavily in the chair opposite him. Vernon was still standing, but the bluster had drained out of him and left something smaller. Petunia looked at Harry with an expression that was as close to honest as he'd ever seen from her. Not kind, but honest. Stripped of the performance of normalcy. This will bring them here, she said. You're kind. They'll come. They'll want to know about this. Is that bad? Harry asked. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Looked at her hands. For us it is, she said finally. For you. She stopped again, and something crossed her face that Harry couldn't name, and then she stood up and straightened her cardigan, and the shutters came back down, and she was Petunia Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive again, sealed up tight. Go to bed, she said. And keep those covered. He didn't keep them covered. Not because he was defiant, though he was, in the particular quiet way that small people with no power learn to be, but because covering them felt wrong. Like putting a cloth over a window. The marks were part of him now. That was simply true. In bed that night, in the cupboard, he lay with his wrist close to his face, and watched the left one glow faintly in the dark. It had dimmed from the initial flare but hadn't gone out entirely. He wondered, distantly and without particular anxiety, whose mark it was. Because that was the thing about soul marks, even without knowing the theory, without having anyone explain the concept to him, he knew it instinctively the way he knew how to breathe. These marks were doors. And on the other side of each door, someone was there. The one on his wrist felt sharp. Warm. Like someone thinking very hard, and thinking quickly, and not sleeping when they probably should have been. He liked that, for some reason. He closed his eyes and pressed the mark lightly with his thumb. Miles away, in a bedroom in Hampstead full of books, a girl he never met sat up suddenly in bed and touched her own wrist. Hermione Granger had not been having a normal evening either. She'd been doing what she did most evenings, which was reading, currently a dense and fascinating book on Celtic mythology her father had found at an estate sale, full of knot patterns and spiral symbols that she'd been trying to identify and catalog in the notebook she kept for exactly this purpose. Her parents were downstairs watching something on television. The house was warm and quiet and smelled like the particular mix of dental surgery antiseptic and old paper that Hermione had always found deeply comforting. The mark appeared on her left wrist at 9:30. She felt it before she saw it, a pull, sharp and directional, like a compass needle snapping into alignment. She looked at her wrist and watched, completely motionless, as the mark formed itself in real time. Not slowly. It didn't grow like something drawn, it arrived, the whole shape at once like a photograph developing. 3 interlocking loops, the central space like a door. Hermione stared at it for 3.5 seconds. Then she opened her notebook to a fresh page, found a pen, and began to draw exactly what she saw with as much precision as she could manage, because whatever this was, documentation was the correct immediate response. Her heart was pounding. She was noting that it was pounding, and also noting that the mark felt warm, and that warm had a quality to it, not just temperature but personality, like the difference between fireplace warm and sunlight warm. This was sunlight warm, she thought, even at 9:30 at night. Even though she was alone in her room and no one was looking. Someone was thinking. She could almost, not quite, but almost, feel the shape of a mind that wasn't hers, like hearing music through a wall. Careful. Patient. Observing. She finished drawing the mark and dated the entry. Then she went downstairs. "Mom," she said, "I think something's happened." Emma Granger, who was sensible and loving and had 3 years ago accepted that her daughter was magical with the pragmatic grace of someone who had simply decided to roll with the world's more alarming surprises, looked at the mark on her daughter's wrist. She went very still in the way that meant she was keeping her reaction measured for Hermione's benefit. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "No. It's warm." Hermione sat down on the arm of the sofa. "It's a soul mark, Mum. I've read about them. They're rare, they indicate a magical bond between people. The theory is contested but the historical record is clear about the basic mechanics. The mark appears when the connection is, when the bond is activated. When the other person, when they..." She stopped. "Touch the mark again. Someone just turned 7," she said softly. "I think they just turned 7 and their magic woke up." "How old are you?" her mother asked. 8. Hermione looked at her wrist. "They're younger than me." Her mother sat with that for a moment. Is that all right? That they're younger? The bond doesn't care about that," Hermione said with the certainty of someone who had read 6 books that touched tangentially on the subject even if none of them addressed it directly. "The bond is about magic. About compatibility. On a level that's deeper than..." She paused, frowning. "I need to find better sources. I need to find everything written about this." "It's nearly 10 o'clock," her mother said. "The library opens at 9 tomorrow." Hermione looked up. "Mum, this is important. Whatever just happened, whoever is on the other side of this, I can feel that it's important. Not just for me. For more than me." Emma Granger looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she got up and made them both a cup of tea, because sometimes that was the only sensible response to the world. "Bed first," she said. "Library tomorrow." Hermione went to bed. She lay with her arm above the covers, watching the mark glow faintly in the dark. She thought about Celtic knot patterns and the pages she'd been reading before it happened. 3 loops. A central space like a door. She thought about the feel of that other mind through the wall, careful, patient, observing, and felt, for reasons she couldn't yet articulate, completely certain that whatever came next, it would be worth it. She was asleep by 11. The mark glowed on. Across the channel, in the grounds of the Delacour family estate in the Loire Valley where the summer evening was warm and smelled of lavender and river water, Fleur Delacour was standing in the formal garden and arguing. Not with anyone present. This was a distinction Fleur considered important. She was arguing with the situation, which had presented itself in the form of a mark on her right shoulder that had appeared approximately 40 minutes ago, while she was trying to practice a particularly demanding piece of Veela-influenced wandless magic that her grandmother had been teaching her. The mark had interrupted the practice. The mark had also, she was extremely displeased to note, felt significant in a way that her shoulder had no business feeling without her permission. Fleur was 9 years old, and already possessed of the particular kind of certainty that came from being beautiful, magically gifted, and raised by a family that told her regularly that she was remarkable. This certainty was not vanity, it was, in her own estimation, simply accurate assessment. She knew she was powerful. She knew she was exceptional. She did not, in general, appreciate being claimed by things. Gabrielle, she called across the garden. Viens là. Her 6-year-old sister appeared from behind a rose hedge with dirt on her dress and the expression of someone who had definitely not been doing anything wrong. Oui? Fleur held out her shoulder, twisting to show Gabrielle the mark. Tell me what you see. Gabrielle looked at it with enormous solemnity. It's pretty, she said. What shape? Like fire. Gabrielle tilted her head. Or wings? Both. Both. Fleur agreed, standing straight again. Wings and flame. She touched it with 2 fingers. It was warm in a way that fire was not, deeper than surface warmth, and it pulled when she pressed it, not painfully but directionally, like compass north. She turned slowly in the garden, testing the direction, and stopped when the pull intensified. North. Slightly west of north. England. She dropped her hand. Her expression went through several things in rapid succession: surprise, irritation, and beneath both of those, buried quickly under good French composure, something that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it. Something that felt uncomfortably like inevitability. Fleur Delacour did not like inevitability. She preferred to make her own choices. Go back inside, she told Gabrielle, who went with suspicious obedience. Fleur stood alone in the lavender-scented garden with her shoulder burning gently and England sitting on the compass needle of her mark, and she made a decision. She was going to find out exactly what this was. She was going to understand it completely. And then she was going to decide what to do about it on her own terms, because that was how she did everything, and no ancient magical bond was going to change that particular feature of her character. Inside, through French doors and a carpeted hallway, her mother was playing piano. The music came through the warm evening air, slow and liquid. Fleur listened to it for a moment, then went inside to find her grandmother. Apolline Delacour was in her sitting room with her reading glasses on and a glass of wine half finished at her elbow, and she looked up when Fleur appeared in the doorway with that steady, assessing gaze that Fleur had always privately called the grandmother look, the one that meant she was already several steps ahead of whatever you were about to say. Ah, her grandmother said. She looked at Fleur's shoulder. She set down her book. Come and sit. You knew this would happen, Fleur said. I knew it was possible. Sit. Fleur sat because arguing with her grandmother from a doorway was tactically inefficient. What is it? A soul mark. Her grandmother removed her reading glasses. A very old kind. The kind that comes in sets. Fleur's eyes sharpened. Sets. 3 marks to 1. Her grandmother picked up her wine. A tri-soul bond. I have read of them. I have not known one in my lifetime. Neither has anyone living, I suspect. They stopped appearing several centuries ago, and wizarding scholars largely concluded they had died out. She looked at her granddaughter calmly. It appears they were wrong. Who? Fleur asked. Who is the who do I, that I cannot tell you? Her grandmother smiled slightly. The bond knows. The bond has always known, that is rather the point of it. The mark will pull you toward them, and eventually the distance will become. She paused, choosing the word. Uncomfortable. How uncomfortable. More so as you grow older. Her grandmother's smile faded into something more honest. Fleur. This is not a small thing. A tri-soul bond at this level of activation, appearing simultaneously across multiple countries. She shook her head. Something has woken. Something old. And whatever woke it, I suspect the Ministry of Magic and several other interested parties will be extremely eager to find out what. Fleur was quiet for a moment. Then, 3 marks to 1. 3 witches? Or wizards? The bond does not, 3 marks to 1 person. Fleur's voice was careful. The other 2. Where are they? Her grandmother looked at her. You can feel the others? Fleur nodded slowly. She hadn't realized until just now that she'd been parsing it. The warm golden glow from the north-northwest, and underneath it, quieter, almost like something sensed in peripheral vision, 2 other points of presence. One sharp and warm and sleepless. One colder, more contained, further east. All of them connected to the same central point, the one directly north-northwest, the one that was pulling with the steady inevitability of gravity. Yes, she said. Her grandmother was looking at her with an expression Fleur couldn't read. Good, she said finally. Then you are already further along than most. She picked up her book again. Sleep. There is nothing to be done tonight. Fleur went to bed. She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling and felt the pull in her shoulder like a star she could navigate by. She thought, I will find out what this is on my own terms. She thought it very firmly. She thought it in both French and English to make sure it was completely understood by whatever cosmic force had decided to drop a bond on her shoulder without asking. She was still thinking it, with slightly less certainty, when she fell asleep. The 4th of them wasn't asleep. Daphne Greengrass was 8 years old and sitting in the library of Greengrass Manor, which was significantly more impressive than a local branch library and significantly less welcoming, given that it was her father's space and she was only allowed in by sufferance. She'd learned to be very quiet in the library. She'd learned to be very quiet in most places. The mark appeared over her heart, and she felt it the way she felt most things, from the inside out, catalogued and contained before it could show on her face. The flare of heat, the pressure, the resonant bell tone in her chest. She breathed through it. She looked down at the collar of her nightgown, pulled it aside slightly to see the mark, and studied it for precisely as long as she needed to. Then she pulled her collar back into place and returned her attention to the book she'd been reading. Her mind, however, was not on the book. Daphne Greengrass had grown up in a house where information was currency, and showing your hand meant losing. She'd learned to read the room before she could read books. She'd learned that a Greengrass in public was a performance, and a Greengrass in private was something else entirely, and the distance between those 2 things was where her family lived. She touched the mark through the fabric of her nightgown. It was warm. Significantly warm, and pulling, not like the compass needle pull she'd read about in the one book she'd managed to find on soul bond theory, which described the sensation as a gentle draw. This was not a gentle draw. This was the kind of pull that was going to require active effort to ignore. She thought about what she knew about the tri-soul bond, which was not much, because not much had been written and most of what had been written was in sources her father kept locked in a separate cabinet she hadn't yet worked out how to open. She thought about the fact that the bond led somewhere, which meant it led to someone, which meant somewhere in the world there was a person she was bonded to, and the mark was over her heart, which was the most significant of the 3 positions, which meant the central bond position was hers, which meant, no. She corrected herself. The mark positions didn't designate hierarchy. She'd read that much. They designated nature of connection. Heart mark, deepest. Most fundamental. She sat with that for a moment. She pulled the collar of her nightgown aside again and looked at the mark. It glowed faintly gold against her pale skin, intricate and permanent and undeniably beautiful if you were inclined to find such things beautiful, which Daphne generally wasn't. But she noticed. She thought about her father. About what he would say when he found out. Because he would find out, he always found out. Cyrus Greengrass was a man who treated information like oxygen, and Daphne was living in his house. The Greengrass family was neutral. Carefully, expensively, strategically neutral, positioned between the dark families and the light families like a ship between 2 weather systems, profiting from both and committed to neither. A soul mark this strong would not remain neutral. Whatever it was connected to, it would have gravity. It would pull things into orbit around it. Daphne thought, I need to know who this is before my father does. That was the first decision. Clear, clean, efficient. She filed it in the same place she filed all her useful decisions, the part of her mind she kept very quiet and never showed anyone. The second decision came a moment later, and surprised her a little with its clarity. Whatever this turns out to be, I am not going to be managed. Not by her father's politics. Not by her family's neutrality. Not by anyone. She closed the book she hadn't been reading. She stood up, moved through the dark library with the sureness of someone who knew the furniture by habit, and went back upstairs to bed. In her room, with the curtains open and summer moonlight lying across her floor in long pale lines, she lay down and felt the mark warm over her heart. 3 other presences, dimly apprehensible, like voices in the next room, one close and sharp and sleepless, one distant and proud and resisting, and one at the center, quieter than she expected, observing from the dark. Observing. She recognized that quality immediately, because she did it herself. The central one was watching. Patient. Taking everything in. Waiting. Daphne Greengrass, for only the second time in her careful life, smiled when no one was looking. At number 4 Privet Drive, the kitchen light was off and the house was quiet, and Harry Potter lay in his cupboard with 3 marks glowing softly on his skin. His wrist, his shoulder, his chest. He wasn't thinking about soul bonds. He didn't have the vocabulary yet. He was thinking, with the particular clarity that came to him sometimes in the dark, about the way the 3 marks felt different from each other. The wrist one, sharp, curious, relentlessly awake. The shoulder one, warm, proud, trying to contain something big. The chest one, cool on the surface, much deeper underneath, watching. He pressed his hand over the one on his chest. It responded to the touch, a pulse of warmth that went through his whole body in a slow wave. As if it was saying, yes. Here. Still here. He didn't feel afraid. He'd expected to feel afraid, in the abstract way you expect certain emotional responses to situations. Unexpected marks appearing on your body in the night seemed like a fear situation. But there was nothing threatening in any of this. It felt the opposite of threatening. It felt like the first time in his life that the world had acknowledged him as someone worth acknowledging. He thought about the 3 different presences. He thought about the mark on his chest, the one that pulled deepest, the one that had felt the most like a claim when it arrived, and how the presence behind it was so still and contained and watchful that he'd almost missed it, but when he found it, it was the most solid of the 3. Like a room with thick walls. He thought, quietly and without embarrassment, there are 3 people in the world who are somehow mine and I am somehow theirs. He held that thought. He turned it over. Outside the cupboard, the kitchen clock ticked. The street was empty and still. The Dursleys were asleep upstairs, and Petunia's last words, "Cover them up," sat in the dark of the cupboard like a stone. Harry looked at the mark on his wrist, glowing soft gold. No, he thought. Not covering them. Not now. Not ever. Something had changed tonight, not just in him, but around him, in the structure of the world, like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting for a very long time. He could feel it without being able to name it. Magic, older than any word he knew for magic, had looked at him in his cupboard and said this one, and had marked him for something. He wasn't afraid of that. He'd been afraid of Vernon, of Dudley and his gang, of teachers who looked the other way, of hunger and cold, and the particular cruelty of being told you were nothing by people who were supposed to love you. He'd been afraid of small things because small things were what could reach him. But this, whatever this was, wherever it was leading, this didn't feel small. It felt like the first large thing that had ever happened to him that was not a disaster. He closed his eyes. The marks glowed on wrist, shoulder, chest. 3 lights in the dark, each one a door, each door already slightly open. And somewhere in Hampstead, Hermione Granger was finally asleep with a notebook full of careful observations on her bedside table. And somewhere in the Loire Valley, Fleur Delacour was failing to stop being pulled north even in her dreams. And somewhere in Greengrass Manor, Daphne Greengrass had filed her first 2 decisions and was already making her third. The ancient magic that lived in Harry Potter's blood, the old protection, the love-forged shield that had turned Voldemort's curse into a scar, stirred for the first time since Godric's Hollow. It recognized what had happened. It was, in whatever way ancient and wordless magic could be said to be anything, satisfied. The bond had found its people. Now all they had to do was find each other. Chapter 2. The Girl Who Knew. First, the Hampstead Branch Library had a section on mythology that Hermione Granger had already read completely by the time she was 7. The folklore section she'd finished at 6.5. The children's reference section was something she visited occasionally out of nostalgic obligation, the way you might revisit a house you'd outgrown. She was there at 9:03 on the morning after her mark appeared, standing at the desk with her notebook and asking the librarian, Mrs. Patel, if they had anything on soul bond theory in the restricted reference collection. Mrs. Patel looked at her over her reading glasses. The restricted reference collection is for adult researchers, Hermione. I know. But I have a research question that requires adult resources. Hermione put her notebook on the desk. She'd already written 3 pages of preliminary observations and 2 columns of questions she couldn't answer yet. I can show you my methodology if that helps. Mrs. Patel looked at the notebook. Then at Hermione. Then back at the notebook, which was extremely organized and had a color-coded index. She sighed in the way that meant she was about to say yes. What subject exactly? Historical accounts of magical bonding rituals and their physical manifestations in the skin. Hermione paused. Also anything on Celtic binding knot symbology and cross-referencing to medieval Latin texts on magical theory. Mrs. Patel sent her home with 4 books and the understanding that Hermione would return them in better condition than she'd found them, which was never a concern with Hermione, and also the unspoken understanding that whatever the Granger girl was doing with her childhood, it was beyond the pay grade of a branch librarian to question. Hermione spent the next 8 hours reading. By evening she had filled 14 pages and had a working theory. By the end of the week she had a certainty. It took her until she was 9.5 to find a source detailed enough to give her the formal name. It was buried in a translated collection of medieval magical scholarship that her parents ordered from a specialist bookseller in Edinburgh, not because they understood what they were ordering, but because their daughter had written them a very clear request with the ISBN number and a note explaining why the local library's copy had insufficient margin annotations for her purposes. Tri-soul bond, the text called it. Vinculum animarum trinum in the original Latin. Last confirmed case, 1247 AD, in a castle on the Welsh border. 3 witches and a wizard. The text described the bond in terms that were frustratingly vague about mechanism and irritatingly thorough about symbolism. But Hermione read it 4 times and extracted what was useful. The marks appeared at the moment of the central figure's magical awakening. 3 bonds to 1, never the other configuration, always 1 person at the center, 3 around them, though, around, was metaphorical since the bond was non-hierarchical in nature. The central figure's magic was the anchor. The 3 bonds were she struggled for the right word. Not amplifiers. Not supports. Resonators. Like sympathetic strings on an instrument, vibrating in harmony with the primary note without replacing it. The bond strengthened with proximity. The bond communicated across distance, not in words, not precisely, but in emotional register and physical sensation. The bond, once fully activated, was unbreakable by any magic recorded. She underlined that last part 3 times. The central figure in the 1247 case had been a wizard named Cadman who the text described in terms that were clearly awestruck even through the filter of medieval Latin and a modern translation. A power not seen since the age of the founders, the text said. A magic that answered to itself alone. Hermione sat back and looked at the mark on her wrist for a long time. She pressed her thumb against it the way she'd taken to doing when she wanted to feel the presence on the other side, always there, patient and watchful, a mind that she'd come to recognize over 2 years the way you recognize a voice through a wall without ever having heard the person speak. Careful. observant. Occasionally, in the deep of the night, something that felt like loneliness so habitual it had forgotten it was loneliness. That part always made her chest ache. She picked up her pen and wrote at the top of a fresh page, "What is he living through?" Below it, in smaller writing, "Find him before Hogwarts." She thought about that for a moment. Then, being honest, she amended it, "He will be at Hogwarts. Be ready." She was not the kind of person who set goals she couldn't meet. She was very sure she would meet this one. The summer before Hogwarts, Hermione read everything. Not just about the bond, she read Hogwarts, a history, obviously, but also every textbook on the first-year list and 3 years beyond it, and 2 separate legal texts on magical bonding rights under current ministry law, which was where she discovered the first genuinely alarming thing. Under Ministry of Magic Regulation 1962, Section 7, Subsection C, any magical bond of the Trisol classification, should one be identified in a living subject, is subject to immediate ministry review and potential mandatory bond dissolution if deemed contrary to public interest. She read that sentence 5 times. Then she went to find her mother. "Mom," she said, sitting down at the kitchen table with the legal text open in front of her. "I need to talk to you about something." Emma Granger looked at her daughter's face and sat down. "All right." "The Ministry of Magic, it's the governing body for magical Britain, has a law that says they can dissolve soul bonds if they decide it's against public interest." Hermione kept her voice very level. "The bond one have. The Trisol bond. It's the rarest kind and the most powerful kind, and if the ministry finds out about it they may try to break it." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Can they?" "The text says no." "The text says it's unbreakable." Hermione looked at the mark on her wrist. "But that doesn't mean they won't try. And it doesn't mean trying wouldn't hurt things. Or hurt people. So what do? We don't tell anyone until I know who we're dealing with." Hermione closed the legal text. "And I need to know who I'm dealing with at Hogwarts. I need to understand the political landscape before I walk into it with a mark on my wrist that will make me either very interesting or very threatened, depending on who's paying attention." Her mother reached across the table and put her hand over Hermione's wrist, over the mark. Does the bond tell you anything about him? About what kind of person he is?" Hermione thought about 2 years of pressure through a wall. About the quality of stillness on the other side that was never passive, always active, always taking things in. About the occasional flares she'd felt through the bond that weren't emotions exactly but were responses. Quick, decisive, controlled. And underneath all of it, steady as a heartbeat, something that felt like bedrock. "Yes," she said. I think he's extraordinary." She paused. "I also think no one's ever told him that." Her mother looked at her for a long time. "Then," Emma Granger said carefully, "I imagine that's something he needs to hear." The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Hermione had been at the station since 10:15 because punctuality was not negotiable and also because she'd wanted time to watch the platform and get her bearings before things started moving. She was 11 now. The mark on her wrist had not faded or changed, but over 4 years she'd developed such a fluent sense of the presence behind it that she sometimes forgot it was there, the way you forget a compass in your pocket until you need it. She'd done her research. She'd built her framework. She'd come to Hogwarts prepared. What she hadn't prepared for, with all her reading and all her notes and all her careful methodology, was the moment she walked through the barrier at platform 9 3/4 and the mark on her wrist flared hot. Not the gentle warm glow she'd lived with for 4 years. Hot. Insistent. Directional. She stopped walking. Her trolley rolled into her shins. She grabbed it and straightened and looked down at her wrist, which was glowing visibly through her sleeve, then looked up at the platform. He was standing about 30 feet away, small for his age and thin with it, wearing clothes that were too big in the particular way that meant they weren't his own, with round glasses and dark hair that looked like it had given up on order as a concept. He was looking at the train with an expression she recognized from 4 years of feeling it through a wall, careful, taking everything in, not showing anything on his face. Then he turned his head, and he looked directly at her, and the mark on her wrist hit a temperature she didn't have a word for, and he looked down at his own wrist at exactly the same moment she did. They both looked up at the same time. Hermione Granger walked across platform 9 3/4 with her trolley, and her trunk and her cat in his carrier and stopped 3 feet in front of Harry Potter. Up close he was even smaller than she'd estimated, and his glasses had a crack in one lens held together with what appeared to be spellotape, and there was something very steady in his green eyes that she recognized immediately, that she'd known through a wall for 4 years. "Hello?" she said. Then, because she'd planned to be measured and methodical and introduce herself properly. "I'm Hermione Granger. I've known about the bond for 4 years and I have significant amounts of research to share with you, but first, are you all right? You look like you haven't slept." He blinked. Then, slowly, something that was almost a smile. "Harry Potter," he said. "And no. The Dursleys were loud last night." He looked at her wrist, then held up his own. His sleeve was pushed back, showing the marks she recognized like her own face. "You felt it? Just now?" "Yes." She pushed her trolley closer so they weren't blocking the platform. "I've been feeling it for 4 years. You've been. I could feel you, but I didn't know who you were specifically until..." She stopped. This wasn't the order she'd planned. "Sorry. I had a script. I've apparently abandoned it." "Was the script good?" "Very organized. Logical progression of information, 4 years of research condensed into approximately 8 minutes. She looked at him steadily. "Are you really Harry Potter? The Harry Potter? Is there another one? I'd have known about a second one. The bond is very specific." She held out her hand. "Let's start again. Hermione Granger." He shook it. His grip was firm. "Harry Potter. And yes, I know about the killing curse and the scar and all of that. You don't have to. I can see you trying not to look at it." She had been, in fact, exercising considerable restraint about the scar. She met his eyes instead. "I wasn't going to ask about it. Most people do. I'm not most people." She said it without any particular pride, just as a factual distinction. "I'm the girl on your wrist, and I've spent 4 years researching what that means, and the first thing I want to ask you about is how you are, not what happened to you when you were 1. Something shifted in his expression. Not dramatically, it was subtle, the way a muscle eases when you've been holding it tense. "That's yeah? All right." He looked down the platform. "There are 2 others." "Yes." She'd felt the other presences on the bond for years. The proud warm one from across the channel, the cool contained one from further east. "I haven't identified them specifically. I know one is from France. The shoulder one." She looked at him. "You can tell them apart. By feel." He touched his right shoulder briefly, then his chest. "The shoulder one is big. Like she's taking up a lot of space on purpose. And the chest one is..." He paused, looking for words. "Like the library? Quiet, but everything's in there." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "You've been feeling all 3 of us for 4 years." "Yes. While living at the Dursleys." She looked up the name once she had it from his wrist. There was nothing published, but the mark itself was enough context. "Yes." His tone said clearly that this was not the conversation for that topic. "Right." She straightened. "Then you need to get on the train and we need to find a compartment, and I have approximately everything I've learned in 4 years to tell you, and there's a political dimension you need to know about before we arrive." She paused. "I also have sandwiches because the trolley food is expensive and I noticed you probably. I brought extra." He looked at her. She had the sense she'd surprised him, and that he wasn't someone who was easily surprised. "Extra sandwiches?" he said. "Turkey and cress, and egg salad, and one that I made last night when I couldn't sleep that is objectively excellent." She picked up her trolley handle. "Shall we?" They got on the train. The compartment they found was empty at the far end of the train, past the prefect carriage, which suited Hermione because it meant privacy. Harry lifted his trunk onto the rack with more ease than she'd expected given his size. She noticed, filed it, said nothing, and then they sat across from each other with Crookshanks's carrier between them making the low grinding sound that meant he was either content or planning something, and Harry unwrapped an egg salad sandwich while Hermione opened her largest notebook. 3 things, she said. First, what you are and what the bond is. Second, the political problem. Third, what I think we should do about it. That's very organized. I had 4 years to organize it. She found her page. The Trisol Bond. Vinculum animarum trinum. Last confirmed case was 1247. 3 witches bound to 1 central wizard. You're the central figure. He chewed his sandwich. Am I? The marks appear on the central figure's skin when their magic awakens. You're the anchor. The rest of us, our marks appeared on our skin at the same moment, in the positions corresponding to our type of bond. She looked at her wrist. Mine's a wrist bond. The historical texts say that indicates an intellectual and foundational connection. The shoulder mark, France, the proud one, that's a protection bond. She'll be instinctively inclined to. She stopped. That sounds strange when I say it out loud. What's the third? The chest one? She met his eyes. A heart bond. The deepest category. The text says it's the most fundamental of the 3, not hierarchically but in terms of root connection. Whoever she is, she's the most deeply linked to you. She paused. Which sounds alarming, but the text is very clear that none of this is compulsion. The bond reveals something true, it doesn't create something artificial. Harry was quiet for a moment, turning the sandwich wrapper over in his hands. You've been feeling me for 4 years, he said. What did you feel? She'd prepared for this question, actually. She had notes on it. She did not look at her notes. Someone who watches everything and shows nothing. Someone who's very still in a way that isn't peace. She met his eyes. Someone who doesn't expect things to go well and is extremely competent at managing when they don't. His expression didn't change much. Something in his eyes, though. Someone, she continued because she decided to tell the truth and the truth deserved to be complete. Who I was glad to be connected to, even before I knew who you were. He looked at her for a moment. Then, the political problem. She recognized the redirect for what it was and let it go, because there would be time and forcing it now would be counterproductive. Ministry of Magic. Regulation 1962, Section 7, Subsection C. They have statutory authority to review and potentially dissolve any Trisol bond. She turned to her notes page. The legal mechanism requires identification of all parties, submission of evidence to the Wiesengemot, and a vote of at least 2/3 majority. The regulation was written in response to a different situation entirely, but it's written broadly enough to apply to us. Harry looked at her steadily. Can they actually break it? The historical evidence says no. The bond is unbreakable. But that doesn't mean they won't try, and trying might mean. She chose the word carefully. Interference. Monitoring. Using the bond as a political object rather than treating it as what it is. Which is? Ours. She said it simply. Not theirs. He nodded slowly. So we don't tell the ministry. We don't tell anyone we don't choose to tell. She looked at him across the narrow compartment. Including, and this is important, Dumbledore. Something crossed his face at that. Why? Because whatever Dumbledore knows about you, it's filtered through a plan that existed before you did. And a Trisol bond of this strength is significant enough that it might interact with whatever that plan is in ways he won't be transparent about. She paused. I don't know that he's wrong, necessarily. I just know that we should understand things ourselves before someone else decides they understand them for us. Harry looked at her for a long moment. Then the train lurched forward, King's Cross beginning to slide past the windows, and he leaned his head back against the seat and looked at the ceiling. You've been thinking about this for 4 years. Yes. And you just told me all of it. Everything you know. Why wouldn't I? He looked at her. Most people with information use it. I know. She held his gaze. I'm not most people. I said that already. The train pulled out into London morning, picking up speed, and the platform fell away behind them. Crookshanks made his grinding sound. Harry finished his sandwich and looked out the window, and Hermione watched his face and thought about what she'd felt through the bond for 4 years and thought about all her careful research and thought that the gap between knowing something intellectually and knowing it in a room with the actual person was enormous and interesting and somewhat daunting. Harry, she said. He looked at her. You're going to have to talk to them eventually. The other two. He nodded. Then, the one from France. She's resistant. You can feel that? She's been resisting it the whole time. Consistently. Something almost like amusement in his face. It's very determined resistance. Hermione thought about the warm, proud presence she'd felt on the periphery of the bond for 4 years. She'll come around. I'm not going to push it. No. Hermione looked at her wrist, then at the notebook, then decided she was done with the notebook for now and closed it. Neither will I. She thought for a moment. She's at Beauxbatons, probably. The Triwizard Tournament is in 3 years, she'll be here for that. She paused. What about the other one? The cool one? Harry's expression changed slightly. Not much, she was learning already to read the small shifts. Watching, he said. She's been watching since the beginning. She sees a lot. A Slytherin, maybe. Hermione considered. If it is, navigating Slytherin while being bonded to you, given your reputation, the reputation I haven't earned yet. The reputation that already exists. Everyone knows your name, Harry. She said it matter-of-factly. Walk into the Great Hall tonight, and every eye in the room will find you. You should be prepared for that. She paused. How are you with that? He met her eyes. Fine, he said. And she felt it through the bond, not bravado, not performance. Just the simple truth of someone who had stopped expecting comfort from the world and had organized themselves accordingly. She thought, that is going to change. She thought it with the particular certainty she reserved for things she intended to make happen. Halfway through the journey a red-haired boy knocked on the compartment door and turned out to be Ron Weasley, who was good-natured and easy and looked at Harry with undisguised recognition and excitement, and didn't seem to notice Hermione for the first 3 minutes of conversation, which was not unprecedented and didn't bother her. She watched him and noted that he was genuine, which was useful, and that he looked at Harry like Harry was already something, which was less useful because that look tended to come with expectations. She also noticed that Harry was effortlessly kind to him without giving anything away. Not guarded, just contained. It was masterful, actually, for an 11-year-old. Later, when Ron had returned to his own compartment, and they were sharing the objectively excellent sandwich, Harry said, He's all right. He is, Hermione agreed. He'll be your friend, I think. What about you? She looked at him. We're more than that. She said it without any weight, just the observation. But yes. Also friends. He nodded. Looked out the window. Then, Hermione. Yes. Thank you? For the research. For all of it. He was looking at the darkening countryside going past the window. For not treating this like it's mine. Like I'm the one who gets to decide what it means. She thought about that for a moment. It's all of ours, she said. That's rather the point. He nodded again. And through the bond she felt something she hadn't felt from him before, something that wasn't exactly relief, because relief implied a wound healing, and this was more foundational than that. More like the way a wall feels when it's been built correctly. Solid. Settled. She filed that feeling somewhere she didn't have a category for yet, and made a note to think about it later. The Sorting Hat put her in Gryffindor. It put Harry in Gryffindor after a pause that lasted long enough for the hall to get restless, and when his name was called the noise was exactly what she'd predicted, a wave of it, cresting and breaking, all those eyes. She watched him walk to the stool and thought, there he is. She could feel the bond warm and steady under the noise. The hat considered him for a long time. She could see him very still on the stool, face composed, giving nothing away to the room. Gryffindor, finally, and the Gryffindor table erupted. He sat down across from her, and the twins immediately began doing something with his name. She was watching the Slytherin table. There was a girl there, blonde, pale, fine-featured, with a composure that seemed architectural in its precision. She'd been watching Harry since his name was called, and not with the odd fascination most of the Slytherin table was poorly concealing. This was a different kind of watching. The same quality she'd identified through the bond for 4 years. Cool, containing, everything going inward. She was sitting very straight, with her hands folded on the table in front of her, and when the Slytherin table registered the final name and settled back into their seats, she moved her hand to touch the collar of her robe, briefly, precisely, over her sternum. Hermione looked down at her own wrist. She looked back up at the girl. The girl was already looking at something else, face perfectly composed. Slytherin, Hermione thought. And felt through the bond, the cool steady presence she'd peripherally felt for 4 years, and noticed it was closer now. The same quality. The same precision. She looked at Harry, who was being handed food by Neville Longbottom with apologies for the fumble. "Harry," she said quietly under the noise. He looked at her. She glanced toward the Slytherin table. Just once. He looked casually, the way someone looks around a crowded hall. His eyes found the blonde girl, who was talking to her tablemate now. He looked for 3 seconds. Then he looked back at Hermione, and she felt through the bond the same recognition she'd felt on the platform that morning. "Yes," he said quietly. "Slytherin," she said. "Same volume." "I know." He picked up his fork. "She's known the whole time. She waits. That's going to be complicated. Most things are." He looked entirely unbothered. "We'll figure it out." She watched him start eating with the focused practicality of someone who had not always had guaranteed access to food, and thought about the blonde girl in Slytherin navigating this from the other side, and thought about the warm, proud presence in France who was probably already feeling the bond's intensification now that Harry was on the same island as them all. "Hermione," Harry said. You said the bond communicates across distance. Emotion, sensation." "Yes." "What have I been? What has she been feeling from me?" The Slytherin girl. Hermione considered. She'd felt from the cool and contained presence over the years, a recognition of patience. An appreciation of stillness. The way two people who have both learned to be very quiet can recognize each other's quiet as a language. "I think she feels understood," she said carefully. "And I think that's something she doesn't often feel." He thought about that. "And France?" "Resistance," Hermione said, with a faint smile. "She feels very resistant. That's going to be interesting." "Tremendously." She picked up her own fork. "Eat something. It's been a long day." He ate. She ate. The great hall was enormous and loud around them, and somewhere in the Slytherin table a girl touched her collar and watched without watching. And somewhere over the channel, a girl who was very determined to resist the inevitable sat in her dormitory at Beauxbatons and felt the bond sharpen as Harry crossed the threshold of Hogwarts and thought, in French, a series of words that added up to, "Fine then, but this changes nothing." It changed everything, of course. These things always do. After the feast, after the portraits and the moving staircases and Peeves and the fat lady and the Gryffindor common room which was warm and red and full of people, Hermione found a chair near the window and opened her notebook to a new page. She wrote at the top Day 1. Then she thought about what to write beneath it, and instead found herself looking out the window at the dark grounds, at the lake with moonlight on it, at the edge of the forest that was black against a blacker sky. She pressed her thumb to the mark on her wrist. Here, she thought, not in words exactly but in intent. I'm here. We're here. She shaped the thought toward all 3 of them, to the cool and steady one at the Slytherin table who she imagined was also awake, also thinking, also filing everything away. To the proud warm one across the water who she imagined was not going to acknowledge that she was feeling this and was probably sitting with her arms crossed in some beautiful French dormitory being furious about it. To Harry, who was 3 feet away in an armchair with his eyes closed, either asleep or doing a very good impression of it. Through the bond, from his direction, she felt the warm, steady bedrock feeling that she'd come to think of as his signature. The feeling of something that had been tested many times and had not broken. She wrote in her notebook, "He is exactly what the bond always said he was. Possibly more." She paused. Then added, "We have a lot of work ahead." Good. She closed the notebook. Outside, the lake moved under the moon. First year had begun. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening, a letter arrived at Beauxbatons Academy of Magic addressed to Fleur Isabelle Delacour in handwriting that was neat and efficient, and not French. She picked it up off the mail table and looked at the handwriting, and the mark on her shoulder flared warm. She looked around the room with the air of someone who was not going to let this moment mean anything in public, tucked the letter under her arm, and took it back to her dormitory. She sat on her bed. She looked at the letter. She felt the pull in her shoulder, which had been intensifying for 3 weeks now since whatever had happened across the channel that she was absolutely not paying as much attention to as she was paying to it. She opened the letter. "Dear Fleur," it said. "My name is Hermione Granger. I know who you are, roughly, because I have been researching our situation for 4 years. I also know you've been resisting the bond deliberately, which I respect. I'm not writing to tell you what to do or to pressure you into anything. I'm writing because I think you deserve to have information, on your own terms, before someone else provides it in a way that doesn't serve you. The boy we're bonded to is at Hogwarts now. He is extraordinary, not in the way the papers make him sound but in a much quieter and more significant way. There is a political situation you need to be aware of. There is a Triwizard tournament in 3 years at Hogwarts. I think you already knew you'd be there. I think you've known for a while. This letter isn't asking you to decide anything, it's just opening a door. You can walk through it or not. But if you want to know more, write back. I have everything documented. Below it, a postscript. He's not afraid of you, by the way. He's also not doing any of the things you're probably expecting him to do. I think you'll find that interesting, when you're ready to." Fleur read the letter twice. She looked at the wall. She looked at her shoulder. She thought about the mark and about her grandmother, and about inevitability and choice and the difference between them. Then she picked up a quill and wrote back. 3 lines, which was all she was willing to give at the moment. "Thank you for the information. Send what you have documented. I will make my own decisions." She thought about it for a moment. Added a 4th line, "Tell me about him." She sent the letter. She sat in her dormitory with her arms crossed. She felt the bond pull north and slightly west and thought, "This changes nothing." She thought it with slightly less conviction this time. In Hogwarts, in the Gryffindor common room, Hermione Granger's All Persephone arrived through the window with a return letter, and Hermione read it and smiled in the particular way she smiled when something she'd predicted came true. Across the common room, Harry looked up from his Transfiguration essay. "News? France," she said. She wrote back. Something in his face. "Good?" Hermione looked at the letter. "Tell me about him." "Yes," she said. "Very good." The thing about Daphne Greengrass was that she had decided, independently and without consulting anyone, to be patient. She'd decided this in the library at Greengrass Manor on her 7th birthday night, and she maintained it through 4 years of feeling the bond develop and intensify and pull with increasing insistence. She'd maintained it through 2 years at Hogwarts. She'd been sorted a year before Harry, which had been interesting because she'd felt him arrive at Hogwarts before she saw him, the bond flaring as he crossed the grounds, and she'd had to sit at the Slytherin table and compose herself while every other first year watched the door. Now she was in 2nd year and he was in 1st, and she'd spent 3 weeks observing. The library, Tuesday evening. She'd chosen this specific library table at this specific time for 3 specific reasons. It had a sight line to the Gryffindor table's usual research spot, It was far enough from the Slytherin section that Pansy wouldn't wander past and ask questions, and it was close enough to the restricted section that she could plausibly be here for academic reasons. Harry Potter came into the library at 7:30 with Hermione Granger and a red-haired boy who Daphne had already categorized as a well-intentioned loud presence who had not yet learned to be strategically quiet. She watched them settle at their table. She watched Hermione immediately open 2 books and begin cross-referencing. She watched Harry look around the library with the careful attention she'd come to recognize as his default mode, taking the room apart, filing everything, settling. His eyes found her. She held his gaze. Did not look away. Did not arrange her face into the cool social mask she used for most situations. He held her gaze in return. Equally steady. Around them the library was quiet, Madame Pants moving between shelves, other students scratching on parchment. Nobody was looking at this particular corner. Daphne felt the bond between them, the heart bond, the deepest category, pulling with the steady inevitability of a tide, and let herself feel it rather than managing it, which was something she only permitted herself in private and was permitting now because this felt like something worth being honest about. She dipped her chin. A small nod? Almost imperceptible. He returned it. Then the red-haired boy said something and Harry looked away, and Daphne returned to her book, and nothing had happened that anyone watching could have recorded. No conversation. No exchange. Just 2 people across a library who recognized each other, and said so without words. She thought first contact. Successful. She thought, he has very steady eyes for someone who has been through what he's been through. She filed both thoughts in the place she kept things that were true and important, and not for sharing. That night, in the Slytherin dormitory, she felt Hermione send something down the bond, not a message, more like an acknowledgement, a warmth that said I saw, and felt Harry's signature, that bedrock steadiness, warm and present. She felt, most distantly, France, still proud, still warm, beginning despite itself to lean forward. Daphne Greengrass lay in her dormitory and let herself feel all of it, and did not, for once, put a wall between herself and it. Tomorrow she'd put the wall back. Tonight she'd earned this. She closed her eyes. She thought, this is mine. She thought, we are all going to have to be extraordinary for this to work. She thought, with the quiet certainty of someone who has been planning for years, good. I can do extraordinary. I've been practicing. The bond hummed in her chest, warm and steady and alive. 3 presences. 1 center. Not alone. None of them alone anymore. Outside the dungeons, the lake moved in the dark. The castle breathed around them all. First year was 3 weeks old, and the oldest magic in the world had found its people and was settling in for whatever came next, patient as a river. Chapter 3. The world finds out the duel happened on a Wednesday in November, which was, as Hermione would later point out, extremely inconvenient timing given that they had a charms essay due Thursday, and she'd been planning to spend Wednesday evening finishing it. It started with Draco Malfoy, which surprised nobody in retrospect. He'd been building toward it for 2 months, the pointed comments in the corridors, the sneering observations about Harry's clothes and his parentage and his general existence in Malfoy's personal field of vision. Harry had absorbed all of it with the patience of someone who had been absorbing this specific type of person since he could walk, which was not a comforting thing to know about him but was, Hermione had observed, extremely effective. Draco was performing for an audience that kept failing to react, which was making him escalate. The library, Wednesday evening. Hermione was on her second-to-last paragraph. Ron was doing the thing where he stared at his parchment with deep suspicion, as if the essay might blink first. Harry was reading ahead in the Transfiguration textbook, because Professor McGonagall had mentioned a concept in passing that morning that he'd wanted to understand properly, and when Harry wanted to understand something he went directly at it without waiting for the curriculum to catch up. Draco came in with Crabbe and Goyle, which was already a poor sign because Draco only brought Crabbe and Goyle when he wanted ballast, and he stopped at their table with the particular smile he used when he'd decided something was going to be entertaining. "Potter," he said. Still reading books you're not smart enough for? Harry didn't look up from his page. Draco, he said, with the exact mild tone he used for all of Draco's overtures, which Hermione knew from experience drove Draco absolutely mad. That's Malfoy to you, is it? Harry turned a page. Draco's smile sharpened. His eyes moved to Hermione. Keeping Muggleborn company, I see. Can't find better? She's the best student in the year, Harry said, still not looking up. Why would I look for better? Hermione did not look up from her essay either, but she filed the compliment. Draco's jaw tightened. He shifted tactics with the instinctive adaptability of someone raised to read rooms, and his eyes went to Harry's wrist, which was resting on the table with the mark visible. Harry had stopped covering it approximately 30 seconds after arriving at Hogwarts, as promised. Madame Pants had looked at it once and gone back to her books. Other teachers had noticed and said nothing. But Draco had noticed and spent 2 months not mentioning it, which told Hermione he'd been waiting for the right moment to use it. That mark, Draco said, with the careful precision of someone deploying something they'd prepared. My father says soul marks of that kind are illegal. Ministry regulated. He says whoever has one without registration is in violation of. Your father is incorrect, Hermione said, looking up now, because legal inaccuracy was the one thing she couldn't let pass unremarked. Regulation 1962 Section 7 requires registration only upon ministry identification, not upon appearance. No registration obligation exists until the ministry initiates review. She met Draco's eyes. I can cite the subsection if you'd like. Draco stared at her. Then back at Harry, who had finally looked up, and the look on Harry's face was the thing that Hermione identified later as the beginning of it. Not anger, not defensiveness, but a very calm and complete attention, the kind that meant he'd stopped being patient and started being present. Your father should get better lawyers, Harry said. The next 30 seconds happened very fast. Draco drew his wand, not a genuine dueling draw, more the theatrical reach of someone who wanted to be seen reaching, and said something in Latin that was clearly intended to knock Harry's books off the table, which was Draco's usual opening in these situations, something humiliating and small that he could laugh off if challenged. Harry's hand came up without a wand. The spell hit something approximately 6 inches from Harry's face and stopped. Not reflected, not absorbed, stopped, hanging in the air for one extraordinary second like a word someone had said and then reconsidered, and then it dissolved into nothing with a sound like a single piano key struck and released. The library went completely silent. Draco stared. Crabbe and Goyle stared. Ron, who had been staring at his essay, was now staring at Harry with his mouth open. Hermione was very still, watching the space where the spell had dissolved, feeling the bond flare hot and bright in her wrist. Harry lowered his hand. His expression had not changed. Was there anything else? He asked. Madame Pants appeared from between the shelves like a spectre called by the silence. Her eyes went to Draco's wand, to the space above the table where the air still had a faint shimmer, to Harry's absolutely unruffled face. Mr. Malfoy, she said in a voice that could have etched glass. Wand away or out. Draco put his wand away. His face was doing several things at once, which Hermione catalogued with interest, humiliation and calculation, and underneath both of them, deeply buried, something that might have been fear. He left without another word, taking Crabbe and Goyle with him. The library gradually resumed breathing. Ron turned to Harry with the expression of someone whose understanding of the world had just been rearranged. How did you, instinct? Harry said, and went back to his book. Hermione looked at her wrist. The bond was still warm, running higher than its usual ambient glow, and she felt from Harry's direction something she hadn't felt before, not the bedrock steadiness, but underneath it, something hot and very bright and very large, like a furnace door briefly opened. She closed her essay notebook. Harry, she said quietly. He met her eyes. I know, he said. That wasn't standard magic. No. You didn't have your wand out. No. She thought about the 1247 text. A power not seen since the age of the founders. A magic that answered to itself alone. Does that happen often? He was quiet for a moment. Occasionally, he said. At the Dursleys. When I needed something. He looked at her steadily. I've never stopped anything midair before. She thought about the furnace door. About what was behind it. Well, she said, and picked up her quill and went back to her essay, because she needed to think, and she thought best while writing. We should probably talk about that. Probably, he agreed, and turned his page. By Thursday morning it was everywhere. Not in the papers. They didn't have that kind of reach into Hogwarts, not yet, but in the specific information ecosystem of a school, which was faster than journalism and considerably less accurate. By breakfast the story had gone through 4 iterations. Harry had blocked a spell barehanded. Harry had deflected a spell back at Draco. Harry had cast 3 spells wandlessly simultaneously. Harry had made Draco cry. This last version was Seamus's contribution, and had no basis in fact but was the most popular. Professor McGonagall appeared at the Gryffindor table at 7:50 and looked at Harry with an expression that was 3 things at once: concerned, assessing, and beneath both of those, something that was almost certainly impressed, though she would deny it under Veritaserum. Mr. Potter. My office. 8 o'clock. Yes, Professor. He stood up with his toast. Finish your breakfast. He sat back down. She walked away. Ron immediately leaned in and said, Are you in trouble? With the mixture of worry and excitement that characterized most of Ron's reactions to things. Don't think so, Harry said, eating his toast. Hermione thought about Madame Pants, who had seen everything, who reported to the deputy headmistress, who reported to the headmaster. She thought about Dumbledore, who she'd spent 4 years thinking about with the specific wariness of someone who had read enough history to know that great men with good intentions were often the most dangerous men in the room. She said nothing. She ate her breakfast. She felt the bond steady and warm from Harry's direction and thought, he'll be fine. He's always fine. She thought, this is where it starts getting complicated. McGonagall's office had the precise, organized energy of a person who had been organizing things for longer than most people had been alive. Harry sat in the chair across the desk and ate the last of his toast and waited. She sat down. She looked at him. She was, he decided in their first week, one of the few adults at Hogwarts who looked at him and saw a person rather than a legend, which he respected. She was also one of the few who didn't flinch from looking at his scar, which he respected more. Tell me what happened, she said. He told her. Straight and plain, Draco's escalation, the spell, his hand coming up, the spell stopping. He didn't editorialize or minimize. She listened without interrupting, which was itself unusual in adults describing his experiences. When he finished she was quiet for a moment. You had no wand out, she said. No. And you'd done nothing of that kind before. Nothing that targeted. He paused. I've moved things. Made things happen without meaning to. But I've never aimed it. She looked at the mark on his wrist, which he'd placed on her desk unreservedly when she glanced at it. She examined it the way she examined transfiguration problems, precisely, with full respect for the difficulty of the thing. May I? She asked, which surprised him, because she'd asked rather than reached. Yes. She touched the mark with 2 fingers. He felt nothing from her touch, but through the bond he felt Hermione's attention sharpened suddenly, like a tuning fork struck. McGonagall sat back. I know what this is, she said quietly. Trisol bond, Harry said. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. You know. Hermione's been researching it for 4 years. Of course she has. Something that might have been a smile on anyone else. She folded her hands on her desk. Harry. What happened in the library was significant. Not because of the wandless magic, wandless ability is rare but documented. Because of the nature of what you did. She paused. Arresting a spell in motion requires an understanding of magical theory that most graduates don't possess. You did it instinctively at 11. That puts you in a category that has a very short list of historical precedents. I know, Harry said. She looked at him. You don't seem concerned. I'm not going to be less than I am to make people more comfortable, he said. It came out simple and direct, without edge, because it was simply a fact. I spent 10 years being told I was nothing. I know that was wrong. So whatever this is. He gestured at his wrist. I'm not going to apologize for it. McGonagall was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, No. I don't suppose you should. She straightened. Dumbledore will want to speak with you. That's fine. He held her gaze. But what I tell him, and what I know are my choices to make. Another pause. Her expression was hard to read. He was getting better at reading adult expressions, but she was at an advanced level. Yes, she said at last, and he thought she meant more than just agreement with the literal statement. One more thing, she said as he stood. The mark. Other students will press you about it. I can instruct them to don't, Harry said. If someone asks, I'll tell them the truth. If someone tries to make it a problem. He glanced at his hand, then at her, and said nothing else. The ghost of the maybe smile again. Quite, she said. You may go to class. Dumbledore's office was at the top of a tower and required a gargoyle, a password, and a spiral staircase, all of which Harry found slightly excessive but also aesthetically coherent with the general personality of the space, which was full of spinning silver instruments and portraits of sleeping headmasters and a large phoenix that looked at Harry when he entered with the alert, interested attention of something that recognized him. Fawkes trilled once. Harry looked at him and felt the bond pulse warm in all three marks simultaneously, which was unusual and new. He looked at the phoenix. The phoenix looked at him. Dumbledore was behind his desk with his half-moon glasses and his extraordinary beard and the expression he wore. Harry had come to realize, specifically for Harry, a mixture of warmth and assessment that felt genuine on the surface and strategic underneath, like a fire that was also a lamp. Harry, he said. Sit down, please. Lemon drop? No, thank you. Harry sat. He'd been in this office 3 times in 2 months on various pretexts. He'd understood the first time what Hermione had told him before they arrived. This was a man who gathered information by appearing to share it. Who gave you things that cost him nothing to know what you'd reach for. He'd decided to be pleasant and informative about things that didn't matter and entirely opaque about things that did. I understand something remarkable happened in the library yesterday, Dumbledore said, with the warmth of someone sharing an interesting observation at dinner. Draco Malfoy cast a spell at me and it didn't land, Harry said. Wandlessly blocked. Yes. Dumbledore looked at him over his glasses with the particular gaze that Harry had named, privately, the looking for the bottom look. Have you experienced wandless abilities before, Harry? Yes. He didn't elaborate. I see. Dumbledore picked up a small silver instrument and turned it in his hands. Harry, I want you to know that whatever you're experiencing, whatever this bond is. His eyes went to Harry's wrist. My door is always open. I want to help you understand it. Harry looked at the spinning instrument. He looked at Fawkes, who was watching him with those bright eyes. He looked at Dumbledore and thought about what Hermione had said, a plan that existed before you did. I appreciate that, he said pleasantly. I think I'm doing all right. The bond is very rare, Dumbledore said gently. Very powerful. There are people in the wizarding world who will react to it badly. I want to make sure you're protected. From what specifically? Harry asked, with genuine curiosity. A small pause. From those who might try to exploit it. That's very broad, Harry said, still pleasant. Who are you thinking of? Dumbledore smiled. The warm version, the one Harry had to admit was genuinely good. You're very perceptive for 11. I've had to be. Harry stood up. I'll come to you if I have concerns, Professor. I always appreciate the open door. He picked up his bag. Thank you for seeing me. He walked out. He went down the spiral stairs, past the gargoyle, into the corridor. He was halfway to Transfiguration before he let out a slow breath and felt Hermione's attention ping through the bond like a question mark. He thought toward her fine. Shaped it the way he'd been learning to shape things down the bond, not words, but intent with texture. Fine. He's very good. We need to be careful. Her response came back in the same non-language, I know. I expected this. Keep going. He walked to Transfiguration. Behind him, the gargoyle slid back into place, and in his office Dumbledore turned a small silver instrument slowly in his hands and thought. Daphne Greengrass heard about the library incident in approximately 4 minutes, which was faster than average even for Hogwarts, because Pansy Parkinson had been sitting 3 tables over and had seen everything and had the information transmission speed of a very motivated owl. She absorbed the account with her face in its usual configuration, politely attentive, giving nothing, and asked 3 clarifying questions that Pansy answered without realizing they were clarifying questions rather than casual interest. So wandless. Instantaneous. No apparent effort. And Draco was rattled enough that he'd gone to the common room rather than breakfast, which for Draco, who treated breakfast as a political event, was significant. She thought about this while Snape taught potions with his usual combination of genuine expertise and theatrical menace. She thought about Harry's eyes in the library on Tuesday, that steady even gaze. She thought about the bond over her heart, which had been very warm since yesterday. She made a decision by the end of the period. Not an announcing itself decision, those were not how she made decisions. A quiet one, a direction she started moving. She went to the library after potions and sat at the same table as Tuesday, and she waited. He came in at 4:30, alone this time, without Hermione and without Weasley. He had a Transfiguration book and a Charms book, and he moved through the library with the natural quietness of someone who'd spent time in libraries and knew how to be in them. He saw her immediately. Of course he did. He sat down at the table without being invited, across from her, and put his books on the table and looked at her with those green eyes and waited. Daphne Greengrass, who had planned to open with something neutral and information-gathering, heard herself say, "That must have been strange. Stopping something in the air." "A bit," he said. "Did you know you could do it?" "Not until I did it." She looked at his wrist. The mark was visible, relaxed on the table, exactly the same shape as the one in the book she'd found in her father's library last year when she finally worked out the cabinet lock. Not of silver. 3 loops. The central space. She looked at his face. "I'm Daphne Greengrass." "I know." He held her gaze. "Harry Potter." "I know." A pause. "We should talk." "Yes," he said. Not eagerly, just agreeing with the fact. She thought about everything she'd filed over 4 years. About her father and the neutrality and the political geometry. She thought about the decision she'd made at 7 years old and the patience she'd exercised since. She thought about the mark over her heart, which was warm right now in the specific way it got warm when the central bond was close. "My family is neutral," she said. "Officially. My father is careful about appearances. If it became known that I have a tri-soul bond with—" She paused, choosing. "With the person the mark leads to, that would not be comfortable for the family position." "I understand," Harry said. "I'm not saying I'm going to hide it." "I know." He looked at her steadily. "You're saying you need to manage how and when it becomes public. Which is different from hiding." She felt something in her chest, not the bond flaring, but something adjacent, the recognition of being precisely understood. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what I'm saying." "Then that's what we'll do." He said it simply. "Your timeline, your terms." She looked at him for a long moment. She'd expected negotiation. She'd expected the particular pressure of someone who had something she needed, information, connection, precedence, pressing on the terms. "You don't want anything in return. You're already in this," he said. "We both are. There's nothing to negotiate." She sat with that. Then, deciding, Hermione Granger has been in contact with you since the express. Since the platform, he said. She met me on the platform. And France? Writing back. The faintest edge of something in his expression, not quite amusement, but related. Reluctantly. I'll bet. Daphne considered. Hermione Granger is the most capable first year in the school. I've been watching her methodology in the library for 3 weeks. She's remarkable. She paused. I've also been watching you. I know. He didn't say it with any drama. Just confirmation. The library on Tuesday. Yes. She thought about what she wanted to say next and chose to say it plainly because she'd found that the most effective approach with him was plainness. What are you, Harry Potter? And I don't mean the boy who lived, I mean what you actually are. He was quiet for a moment, and she watched something move behind his eyes, not evasion, calculation, the movement of someone measuring not whether to be honest but how. I don't know exactly, he said. But I'm not what anyone expects. She thought, that's the right answer. She filed it. I'm going to help you, she said. Not because the bond says to. Because I've chosen to. She met his eyes. That distinction matters to me. To me too, he said. She nodded once. She picked up her book. He picked up his book. They sat at the same table and studied in the particular comfortable silence of two people who had recognized each other, and didn't need to fill it with anything, and the afternoon moved around them quiet and purposeful. The bond over her heart was very warm the entire time. The month of November unraveled with the particular speed that school months have when things are actually happening. The library incident had not faded. If anything, it grew in the telling, acquiring new details, shedding accurate ones, until the versions circulating among 4th and 5th years bore only architectural similarity to the actual event. Draco, for his part, had gone cold and strategic, which was more alarming than his usual theatrical warmth. Hermione noticed the coldness and catalogued it. She was watching Draco the way she watched all potential threats, not with anxiety, but with the systematic attention of someone keeping a weather eye on the horizon. He's writing to his father, she told Harry one evening in the common room. Ron was playing wizard's chess against Neville and losing with unexpected good humor. I can't prove it, but the behavior pattern fits. And his father will tell the ministry, Harry said. He was doing his essay, actually doing it, rather than staring at it, which was the Ron method. About the mark. Which triggers Regulation 1962. She had her legal notes in front of her. They need to identify all parties before they can initiate review. They know about you. They'll look for the others. France would be hard to find. She's not in the British system. Fleur's at Beauxbatons, but her father is Minister de la Magie French side. There are information-sharing agreements. Hermione tapped her pen against her notebook. Daphne is the most exposed. Slytherin family, on the Ministry's radar already by virtue of her father's connections. If Lucius Malfoy pushes for identification and the Ministry looks at Hogwarts students, they'll find her first. Harry finished. He looked up from his essay. Does she know? I think she knows more than either of us about the political mechanics. Hermione paused. I want to arrange a meeting. All 3 of you together. Properly. Harry looked at her. The 4 of us. She blinked. Yes. Obviously. Sorry. The 4 of us. She looked at her notes. I keep forgetting I'm in it. How? He said, with something in his voice that wasn't quite incredulous. How do you forget? She opened her mouth. Closed it. I think, she said honestly, I spent 4 years in researcher mode and it's become my default position for this. I keep narrating it from outside. She looked at her wrist. I should probably stop doing that. Probably. He agreed, and went back to his essay, and she felt through the bond the warm, steady presence of someone who was, she identified the feeling after a moment, quietly glad she'd admitted it. She was, she thought, going to have to get used to being in this story rather than writing it down. The meeting happened on a Saturday in December, 2 weeks before the Christmas holidays. Hermione had arranged it by letter to Daphne, 1 line, library, south alcove, 10 o'clock Saturday. Just us. Daphne's reply had been 2 words, I know. Harry arrived first. Daphne arrived exactly at 10, alone, wearing the Slytherin composure like a second robe but with something softer underneath it that Hermione could see now she was looking for it. Hermione was already there with her notes, which she'd decided not to consult during the meeting because this was a people situation, not a research situation. The 3 of them sat in the south alcove, the winter light gray and low through the high windows, the library quiet and empty around them. For a moment nobody said anything, and Hermione felt the bond between all 3 of them, her wrist, Harry's shoulder, Harry's chest and Daphne across from him, and felt, for the first time, all 3 resonances simultaneously in the same room. It was extraordinary. Like 3 instruments finding a chord. Harry looked at Daphne. Daphne looked at Harry. Then both of them looked at Hermione, which surprised her. You researched it, Daphne said. You know the most. Start. Hermione started. She talked for 20 minutes. The bond's history, the political risk, the ministry regulation, what she knew about the Malfoy vector, what she'd been able to determine about the French timeline. Daphne listened with her hands folded and her face still and asked 3 questions that were so precise they made Hermione feel briefly competitive, which she noted and set aside. When she finished, Daphne said, My father found out 2 weeks ago. Hermione went still. How? He's clever. A pause. He doesn't know who? He knows his daughter has a soul mark and it's the rare category. He's been managing his reaction. She said it in the tone of someone who had grown up in a house where reactions were managed and knew exactly what it looked like from the outside. He'll make inquiries through his own channels before going to the ministry. He prefers information before action. How long do we have before he has a name? Daphne looked at Harry. He'll find yours first. It won't be subtle. Your mark is visible in public and you're the most famous 11-year-old in Britain. She paused. But knowing your name and doing anything about it are different things. My father is not a man who acts without a complete hand. So we need to make sure he never has a complete hand, Harry said. Daphne's eyes sharpened. Exactly. Hermione looked between them. How? Information asymmetry, Daphne said. He wants to know what we know. We make sure what we know is always ahead of what he can learn. She looked at Hermione. You have contacts in the legal framework already. I've been reading the law. I don't have contacts yet. You will. She said it with a certainty that wasn't arrogance. You should also know that I've identified 2 Slytherin students who are reporting to their families on Harry specifically. Millicent Bulstrode and, more usefully, Theodore Knott, whose father has a direct line to Lucius Malfoy. Knott. Hermione pulled out her notebook instinctively, then remembered she wasn't consulting notes, then noted that Daphne was watching her with something that was almost amusement. She put the notebook down. What has Knott said to his father? About the library incident, everything. About me, nothing. He hasn't noticed the connection. She paused. I intend to keep it that way, Harry said. You've been managing this alone for 4 years. Daphne looked at him. Yes. That's over. She held his gaze. The directness of him was something she was clearly still calibrating to. Hermione could see it, the small adjustments Daphne made when he said something simply and completely without negotiation. I'm aware, she said finally. Hermione pressed her thumb to the mark on her wrist. She felt the 3 of them, Harry's bedrock, Daphne's cool precision, and from across the channel, distant but present, Fleur's warm resistant pull. She thought, we're missing one. Fleur, she said. She needs to be part of this conversation. By letter? Harry said. By bond. Hermione looked at him. You can push through it. I've been doing it all term for emotional register. But you're the center. If you push something specific, something formed, I've never tried that, he said. I know. She held his gaze. Try. He was quiet for a moment. Then he closed his eyes, just briefly, and she felt through the bond something she hadn't felt before, not the ambient warmth of his presence but something sent. Directional. Through the bond like a beam rather than a glow. Across the alcove, Daphne's hand moved to her sternum. Her breath caught slightly, almost imperceptible. Through her wrist, Hermione felt the French end of the bond flare suddenly, unexpectedly, like someone had switched a light on. Then, resistance, the familiar warm wall of Fleur's deliberate containment, and then, underneath the resistance, something that answered. Something that leaned toward the beam despite the wall. Hermione felt Harry open his eyes. She felt that, Daphne said quietly. Yes. He looked slightly surprised himself, and the way he got surprised, barely visible, quickly filed. That was new. Hermione was writing in her notebook before she could stop herself. She caught herself, looked up. Sorry. Instinct. Write it down, Daphne said, and the first hint of warmth in her voice since they'd sat down. Someone should. 3 days before the Christmas holidays, Hermione came down to breakfast and found a letter at her place. French handwriting. She recognized it. The push through the bond, Fleur had written. That was him, wasn't it? Not you. Then, how strong is he actually? I want the honest answer, not the diplomatic one. Hermione wrote back that evening, stronger than anyone we know of in living memory, possibly including Dumbledore, though I'll need more data to confirm that. He's also 11 and doesn't use it as leverage. Does that answer your question? Fleur's response came the next morning, the last morning before the holidays. Yes. I'm coming to the tournament. Not for him, don't misunderstand. For myself. But I'll speak with you. Both of you. A pause visible in the change of ink pressure. All 3 of you. Hermione showed Harry at breakfast. He read it and handed it back. Ron, across the table, was too absorbed in his kipper to notice. She's coming, Hermione said. I know. He picked up his pumpkin juice. Something in his face, not anticipation exactly, but recognition, the way you recognize something you've been expecting without knowing you were expecting it. Good. She thought about 3 years between now and the tournament. 3 years of managing her father's inquiries, 3 years of Daphne navigating Slytherin politics, 3 years of Fleur across the channel growing into whatever she was growing into while still insisting she'd chosen nothing. She thought about the furnace door, that brief glimpse of what was behind Harry's steadiness. Harry, she said. What happened in the library? That wasn't the last time something like that is going to happen. No, he agreed. The next time it happens it might be in front of more people. Probably. He met her eyes. I'm not going to stop it happening. I'm not asking you to. She held his gaze. I'm saying we should be ready. When the world finds out what you are, we should be standing next to you. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his expression, deep, quick, contained in the practiced way of someone who'd been containing things for a very long time. You already are, he said. She looked at her wrist. She looked at him. She thought, yes. We already are. Outside, the first snow of the year was falling on Hogwarts, covering the grounds in white silence, and in the library the south alcove held the echo of something that had been decided there without being announced, and in the Slytherin common room Daphne Greengrass sat with a book open and a letter from her father that she wasn't going to answer tonight in front of her. And in France Fleur Delacour stood at her dormitory window and felt the bond pull north and northwest, and let it pull and did not, for once, pull back. The world was about to find out. Not today. Not this year. But soon. It happened in February. Not because of Draco, in the end. Not because of Lucius Malfoy's inquiries or Cyrus Greengrass's channels, or the Ministry's regulations. It happened because of a troll. The Halloween incident, which had happened in October, which Hermione had resolved not to discuss publicly because the specifics were embarrassing in ways that would take a year to live down, had established certain things about Harry that were useful to know. But February was different. February was the corridor on the third floor that everyone had been told to avoid, and Neville Longbottom, who had gone the wrong way in the dark and found something he shouldn't have found, and the sound of it that carried to where Harry and Hermione were doing something they also shouldn't have been doing in the wrong part of the castle. There were 3 of them, 6th-year Slytherins, probably bored, definitely drunk on something Filch hadn't found yet, and they had Neville backed against the wall with wands out, and Neville was making the face he made when he decided he was going to accept whatever came next as his due punishment for existing, which Harry found, in the half-second he had to process the scene, completely unacceptable. He walked into the corridor. Hermione was behind him and slightly to the left because she'd already read the geometry. "Put those away," Harry said. The 3 Slytherins turned. The biggest one, Warrington, a 6th-year beater whose wand hand was confident in the way that size and 2 years of Quidditch made things confident, looked at Harry the way people looked at small first-year boys who'd walked into the wrong corridor, with the specific amusement of someone who hasn't recalibrated yet. "Run along, Potter," Warrington said. "Private business. With a first year." Harry moved Neville behind him with one hand, without looking. "3 of you. Wands out. Last warning," Hermione said from behind him, and he heard in her voice the thing he'd heard in her voice exactly once before, not anger but decision, the tone of someone who had identified the correct action and was committing to it. Warrington cast first. It was a solid spell, not a child's hex. Hermione deflected it with a shield charm so clean it barely made a sound. His 2 friends cast simultaneously and Harry moved, not back but through, between them, into the space where both spells crossed, and he let them come and felt the magic in them the way he felt Draco's spell in the library and did not stop them, not this time. He redirected them. Not back at the casters, he sent them into the floor, where they hit the stone and discharged in a spray of light that lit the corridor like lightning. Both Slytherins stumbled back. Warrington turned with his wand up and Harry looked at him and said nothing, and the wandless field that had stopped Draco's spell in October was simply there, visible in the dim corridor as a slight distortion, a shimmer in the air around him, and Warrington's arms stopped rising. Not from a spell. From reading the room. "This is done," Harry said. "Go back to your common room." Warrington looked at the distortion in the air. He looked at his 2 friends, both of whom were already recalibrating from confident to uncertain. He looked at Harry's face. He left. They followed. Neville made a sound behind Harry that might have been his name. "Are you hurt?" Harry asked, turning. "No, Neville looked at him with wide eyes. They were 6 years, are you hurt, Neville?" "No." He swallowed. "No, thank you." Hermione had her wand still out, and was watching the corridor for a minute before she put it away. She looked at Harry. He looked at her. The bond was very warm, very bright, and he felt from her direction something that was becoming familiar, a kind of fierce satisfaction that she would never admit to in those terms. "That shimmer," she said quietly. "I know. That was visible. In the dark, it was clearly visible. I know. Neville saw it. Anyone in this corridor could have seen it." He looked at Neville, who was still pressed against the wall, and thought, not containment. Not pretending. "Does it matter?" he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then, "No," she said. "I suppose it doesn't." Neville looked between them. "What's going on?" he asked. Harry put a hand on Neville's shoulder and guided him back toward the inhabited part of the castle. "Nothing you need to worry about tonight," he said. "Let's get you back." Behind them, in the now empty corridor, the stone where the spells had discharged was still faintly warm. The shimmer in the air took another minute to dissipate slowly, like breath on a cold morning. By the next day there were 6 new versions of the story. By the end of the week, 3 of them had reached the ears of people who mattered. By the end of February, Lucius Malfoy had written 2 letters to the Ministry of Magic. The world was finding out. Not catching up, the world never quite caught up, but finding out, piece by piece, the way you find out about a fire by the light it casts long before you find its source. Harry Potter walked through it entirely unbothered, eating breakfast, going to class, reading ahead in textbooks, passing sandwiches to Hermione who forgot to eat when she was thinking, nodding to Daphne in the library with the compact acknowledgement of two people who had an agreement and were keeping it. The bond glowed on wrist, shoulder, chest. Hermione's careful warmth. Daphne's quiet depth. Fleur's distant insistent heat, closer every month, leaning north despite herself. First year ended in June with Harry having the second highest marks in his year after Hermione, which Ron found impressive and Hermione found appropriate. The Philosopher's Stone situation, which Hermione had resolved in March, with Harry present and Daphne informed through the bond as it happened, and which had involved a chess game and a logic puzzle and Harry facing Quirrell Voldemort in the mirror room with the same complete steadiness he brought to breakfast, was documented in her notebook under things that cannot be made public yet. Voldemort had touched Harry and burned. He'd fallen back from him the way you fall from something that contains fire, and Harry had looked at what remained of him leaving through the ceiling with green eyes gone very still, and then he'd looked at the mirror. He'd seen himself in it. Standing, whole, with 3 small lights, wrist, shoulder, chest. Nothing else. No jewel, no trophy. He'd walked out of the room and found Hermione in the corridor, and she looked at his face and said, "Done?" "Done," he'd said. They'd walked back up through the trapdoor together, and Daphne through the bond was steady and present and watchful, and from France the warm resistant pull that Hermione had started privately thinking of as Fleur's way of saying hello was very bright in the early summer evening. The world was finding out. Harry Potter was letting it. Chapter 4. The Fire and the Ice. Second year started with a car. Not a conventional start, Harry would admit, but then nothing about being Harry Potter was conventional, and arriving at Hogwarts in a flying Ford Anglia because the barrier at platform 9 3/4 had sealed itself, which Hermione, arriving by normal means, would later identify as almost certainly deliberate interference from a source she had strong opinions about, was at least memorable. Ron had been enthusiastic about the car. Harry had been less enthusiastic and more methodical. If you can't go through the barrier, you assess alternatives, and the alternatives were limited. He'd let Ron drive because Ron was more excited about it, and excitement was a useful fuel source for bad decisions that you nonetheless needed to make. McGonagall's face when they landed was worth something, at least. Hermione met him in the entrance hall before the feast, which meant she'd been waiting for him, which meant she'd been worried, which she expressed entirely through the briskness of her opening statement. "You're late, and I've identified 3 separate ways this could have been avoided, and also you look fine, so I'm not going to say what I was going to say." "What were you going to say?" "Nothing." She turned and walked toward the great hall. "Come on." He followed her, and through the bond felt the thing she hadn't said, which was something warm and relieved that she'd been filing under logistics since he was 2 hours overdue. He said nothing about it. She would have found the observation counterproductive. Daphne was at the Slytherin table and met his eyes when he walked in. Her expression didn't change, but the bond over his chest warmed briefly, once, a contact, a check. He returned it down the bond with the intent he'd been developing over the past year. She sat back in her chair with infinitesimally better posture, which was her version of relaxing. Second year, he thought. And found, sitting down at the Gryffindor table while Percy Weasley lectured Ron about irresponsibility, that he was genuinely glad to be here. Not resigned glad, not surviving glad. Glad. That was new. The chamber opened in October. He knew it had opened before the announcements, before the cat was found petrified in the corridor, before Filch's reaction to Mrs. Norris and the writing on the wall. He knew because Daphne told him through the bond. Not in words, in the sharp specific texture of danger moving, coming from below, at 2 in the morning the night it happened, sitting up in her Slytherin dormitory 3 floors below with her hand over her sternum and her face very still. He sat up in his own bed and thought at her, "What do you know?" Not a question, a request. She gave him what she had, rumors in the Slytherin common room, older students who'd heard their parents mention it. The specific named Chamber of Secrets in a conversation she'd overheard between 2 fifth-year Slytherins who'd gone quiet when they noticed her. He lay back down and stared at the curtains of his four-poster and thought about what was in the chamber, and what opened it, and the particular history he carried in his scar. Then he thought toward Hermione, who would be awake, she was almost always awake, and shaped something precise down the bond. Research. Chamber of Secrets. Tonight if possible. Through the wrist bond, warm and immediate, already started. Of course she had. By November Hermione had a working theory she presented to him in a section of the library that Madame Pants didn't check after 8, on 3 sheets of parchment covered in her handwriting which got smaller and more condensed as the theory got more complicated. Basilisk, she said. Enormous snake, kills with direct eye contact, the petrifications are consistent with indirect viewing, reflection, something seen through water or through the ghost's translucent body. The question is method of transport. The school's plumbing system is old enough to have passages large enough for, I can hear it, Harry said. She stopped. What? In the walls. It moves through the walls. He met her eyes. I can understand it. Hermione was quiet for exactly 3 seconds, which was long for her. He watched the information land in her, get processed, get connected to other things. He saw the moment she reached the conclusion. Parseltongue, she said. Yes. You've known since the zoo, before Hogwarts. I can talk to snakes. He said it without apology. I didn't know what it was called. She looked at him. Does anyone else know? Dumbledore probably suspects. Nobody else. She thought for a moment. It's a gift that has a bad reputation among wizarding people. Historically associated with dark magic. She met his eyes. It isn't, necessarily. It's a language. I know what it is, he said. Yes. She set down her parchment. Can you, if you heard it moving, could you follow it? I've been following it for 3 weeks. He held her gaze. I know roughly where it is. Where it's going. She stared at him. Harry. You've been tracking a basilisk through the castle walls for 3 weeks and you didn't. What would you have done with the information? She opened her mouth. Closed it. Pressed her lips together in a way that meant she was accepting a fair point while finding it deeply irritating. Told someone? She said. Who? Silence. Dumbledore is aware there's a problem, he said. He's doing the thing where he lets it develop to see where it leads. He picked up one of her sheets of parchment. I'm not interested in that plan. So what's your plan? He looked at her steadily. Find the entrance. Work out how to neutralize a basilisk. Close it before someone gets killed rather than petrified. She pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment. Okay, she said. What do you need? He thought about this. Roosters, he said. Basilisk venom is destroyed by. I need to find that out. And there's a second issue. What? Someone's opening the chamber. Something is compelling them or controlling them, and I don't think they know they're doing it. He paused. I think it's a possession. She looked at the scar on his forehead. She didn't say what she was thinking, and he appreciated that, because what she was thinking was the same thing he was thinking, and neither of them was ready to say it as a sentence yet. Research tonight, she said. Tomorrow morning over breakfast you can tell me what the snake sounds like in the walls and we'll map the movement. We'll do it quietly, he said. Obviously. She picked up her quill. I'm making a list. Daphne's contribution to the chamber situation came mid-November in the form of a piece of information she passed to him in the library with the precision of a card sharp dealing a hand, a folded note placed on his side of the table, while she appeared to be entirely absorbed in her own potion's text. He opened it under the table. 4 words, Malfoy has a diary. He looked up. She was reading. He looked back down. He thought about it for 7 seconds, then folded the note, and put it in his pocket, and thought toward her down the bond. Who told you? Through the heart bond, careful and directed, overheard. Common room. Draco showed it to Not. Old. Very old. Something wrong about it. He thought, Hermione. That evening he told Hermione about the diary and watched her face go through 3 distinct stages: recognition, connection, and the particular expression she had when something frightening turned out to be something she could research, which was a form of relief. "A diary as a vessel," she said. "The possession mechanism. If it's old enough and the magic embedded in it is strong enough." She stopped. "How old?" Daphne said it looked very old. "And that something was wrong about it." "Wrong how?" He shaped the question down the bond toward Daphne, felt her precision as she formed the answer, brought it back. "Cold," he said. She said it felt cold from across the room. Hermione wrote something down. "Then, we need to get the diary. We need to find who has it. Draco has it, but he wouldn't be the one." Harry thought about the voice in the walls, the pattern of movement, the timing of attacks. "Ginny Weasley," he said. "She's been pale for weeks and she keeps losing time." Ron mentioned it. Hermione looked up from her notes. "If she has it, and it's controlling her, and we take it from her, the possession ends." "Yes. And she doesn't know what she's been doing." "No. So we need to get the diary without making it about her." Hermione's jaw set in the way it did when she was making a decision that was both correct and difficult. "I'll talk to her." "She might not, I know." She met his eyes. "I'll be careful." He believed her. He watched her pack up her notes with the organized purpose of someone who had decided on a course of action and was implementing it. He thought about the voice in the walls, which had been quiet for 2 weeks, which meant the basilisk was settled somewhere, which meant the diary wasn't being used right now, which meant there was a window. "Hermione," he said. The entrance to the chamber. "I found it last week. Girls' bathroom, 2nd floor, the one that's out of order." She looked at him. "The one with the ghosts. Moaning Myrtle." "Yes." He paused. "I can open it." "Parseltongue." "Of course you can." She looked at him for a long moment. "What's down there?" "I don't know yet." He met her gaze. "But I'm going to." "Not alone," she said immediately. "No," he agreed. "Not alone." They got the diary from Ginny Weasley in December, 3 days before the Christmas holidays, through a combination of Hermione's careful and genuinely kind conversation with a girl who was already aware something was wrong with her and needed someone to take her seriously, and Harry passing information to Daphne, who passed it through her connections to establish that the diary had moved from Draco to Ginny via a mechanism that Lucius Malfoy had arranged at Diagon Alley in September. Harry held the diary for 4 seconds. He felt the cold that Daphne had described from across a room, directly through his palm, and also something else, a recognition, a resonance from the scar on his forehead, one dark thing identifying another. He gave it to Hermione. "Destroy it," he said. "How?" "Basilisk venom. I'll get some." He paused. "Or the Phoenix." He thought about Fawkes, who had looked at him on the first day with the attention of something that recognized him. "Fawkes can destroy it." "You can't just ask Dumbledore's Phoenix." "I'm not going to ask Dumbledore." He thought for a moment. "But I think if I went to the office, Fawkes would help." She stared at him. "You think the headmaster's Phoenix will help you independently of the headmaster?" "I think Fawkes is his own creature and makes his own choices." He met her eyes. "Worth trying." She looked at him for a long 3 seconds. Then, "If that works, I'm adding it to the notes." It worked. He went to the headmaster's office at 11 in the evening, on the strength of knowing the Gargle password because he paid attention to details like passwords, and found the office empty and Fawkes awake on his perch, watching the door with those bright eyes. Harry set the diary on Dumbledore's desk, and Fawkes looked at it, and made a sound that was not the liquid trill but something shorter and harder. Then he breathed on it, not fire, something older, something that carried the same quality as Harry's marks, and the diary dissolved. Not burned. Dissolved. Like something that had never been meant to persist. Harry stood in Dumbledore's office and felt the scar on his forehead pulse once, sharp, and then nothing. Through the bond, from all 3 of them simultaneously, warmth. Not alarm. Not question. Just warmth, and presence, and Daphne's particular quality of deep, still acknowledgement. He looked at Fawkes. Fawkes looked at him. He said, "Thank you," meaning it. Fawkes trilled, once, and closed his eyes. Harry left the office. He was at the bottom of the spiral staircase when he heard the gargoyle admit someone else above him and Dumbledore's footsteps on the stairs, and he stepped into an alcove and breathed in the dark and listened to the silence from Dumbledore's office for a long minute. Then he went to bed. The chamber opened anyway, in February, because the possession had done its work before the diary was destroyed and the basilisk had been given its route. A Hufflepuff girl, Hannah Abbott, found petrified in the corridor near the bathroom with a sentence scrawled on the wall in what was very deliberately not her handwriting. Harry heard the snake moving before anyone else. He was at breakfast and the sound of it came through the walls of the great hall like a frequency below other sounds, directional and purposeful, heading down and east. He was on his feet before he thought about it. Hermione was looking at him across the table. She read his face. She stood up. Ron said, "Let's go to class," Harry told him, which was the wrong thing to say to Ron, who immediately looked more interested, but there wasn't time for the right thing. He and Hermione were already moving. The bathroom. The entrance in the floor, the sink that moved when you spoke the word. Hermione had a torch. He had nothing but his wand and the parseltongue that he was increasingly not treating as strange or shameful, because it was his. The chamber was enormous in the way that ancient things are enormous, not just physically but in terms of the space they take up in the world, the weight of age. Harry walked down its length with Hermione steady at his left shoulder, and felt the basilisk somewhere below, felt its movement, felt the hissing shape of its language through the walls. Then it came. From a side passage, enormous, moving with the silent confidence of something that had never been threatened. Harry turned toward it, and closed his eyes because he thought about this, and the strategy was clear. You could not fight what you could not look at with your eyes open, and so you fought it differently. He listened to it. He heard its language, and he spoke back. Hermione heard him speaking and went perfectly still behind him. She knew what she was hearing, and she knew better than to move or interrupt the shape of what he was doing, because she had excellent instincts about moments that required stillness. The basilisk stopped moving. Harry spoke to it in parseltongue, not commands, something more complicated than commands, because a 1,000-year-old serpent didn't respond to commands the way a garden snake might, and he'd thought about that too, lying awake in November working out the strategy. He spoke to it about the chamber. About Salazar Slytherin, whose heir was gone now, whose vessel was ash. About the command that had been given no longer existing to be followed. The basilisk was not a simple thing. It understood in the way that very old and very powerful creatures understand, incompletely, and with deep suspicion. But there was a long silence, and in the silence Harry held his position with his eyes closed, and his wand at his side and the bond from Hermione pressing steady and fierce against his wrist. Then the basilisk moved. Not toward him. Away. Down the passage it had come from, back into the depths of the chamber. He opened his eyes. Hermione exhaled. "Did you just talk a basilisk out of killing us?" she said. "Out of killing us today," he said. "It's still down here. We need to think about the permanent solution." She looked at him. "You knew you were going to try that. I thought it might work." "You thought." She stopped. She pressed her thumb very hard against the mark on her wrist, which he'd come to recognize as something she did when she was processing something that had frightened her. "That was remarkable," she said in a tone that was doing the work of about 6 other statements. "The parseltongue or everything," she said. "Specifically the part where you closed your eyes and walked toward it." He thought about it. "What else would I have done?" She looked at him for a long moment in the torchlight of the Chamber of Secrets. "Exactly," she said softly. "What else?" They closed the chamber that afternoon. Harry spoke, the entrance sealed, and the snake in the sink's mouth clicked back into place with the finality of something that knew it was permanent. He made arrangements for the basilisk that he didn't share in detail, because some things were between him and the creature, and the important outcome was that it wouldn't be hurting anyone. McGonagall found out via Dumbledore, who found out because Dumbledore always found out, and he called Harry to his office that evening with the look of someone who was reassessing their model of a situation. "The chamber," Dumbledore said. "Sealed." "Yes." "The basilisk?" "Not a threat to students." He held the headmaster's gaze. "I resolved the situation." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, turning that silver instrument in his hands. His eyes on Harry were the deep, considering kind, the bottom of the lake kind. "Harry," he said carefully. "What you can do, I know what I can do," Harry said without heat. "I've known for a while. There are people who will be afraid of it. I'm not responsible for other people's fear." He met the blue eyes behind the half-moon glasses with the steady directness he'd been developing since he was 7 in a cupboard and had decided that the world's comfort was not his problem. "I'm responsible for what I do with it. And I'm not doing anything that needs managing." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. "No," he said finally. "I don't suppose you are." The letter from France arrived in March, and it was different from the others. Fleur's letters had evolved over 18 months from 3 guarded lines into something more substantial, though she maintained throughout a quality of careful revelation, giving information in precise controlled portions like someone serving wine from a bottle they intended to finish but not rush. Hermione had come to find it deeply charming without quite admitting that to anyone. Harry had said once that it was like watching someone argue with a door they'd already decided to open. This letter was different because it was addressed to Harry. Not to Hermione, who had been the primary correspondent. To Harry, in handwriting that was decisive and slightly aggressive in the angle of its letters, the way someone writes when they're doing something they've been arguing themselves into doing for several months. "Potter," it began, which Hermione noted when she handed it over and which Harry noted when he read it, because it was French precision, not rude, just honest about where they were in this. "I have been thinking about the bond. I have been thinking about you. I want it understood that these are separate processes, and only occasionally overlap. I am coming to Hogwarts in 2 years for the tournament. Maman says I should write to you before then rather than arriving with nothing said between us. I think she is right, which is annoying because I prefer to think she is wrong. I can feel you through the bond. You probably know this. I can feel that you are not what I expected, and I expected quite a lot, most of it irritating. What I feel instead is, someone who does not need to be told they are extraordinary because they already know, and who does not make a performance of knowing. This is unexpected. I am choosing to find it interesting rather than alarming. I am Fleur Delacour. I am 11, nearly 12. I am a quarter Veela, which people make far too much of, and a full witch, which people make far too little of. I am the best student in my year at Beauxbatons, which should not be a competition with Hermione Granger but probably will become one, and I intend to be prepared for it. Tell her I said so. I am writing this in English because it is good practice. My English is excellent. Do not correct it. I will write again. This is not a question. F. Delacour. Harry read it twice. He handed it to Hermione. She read it and felt something in her chest that was warm and slightly competitive, and which she categorized, after a moment, as exactly what Fleur had predicted she'd feel. "Tell her I'm looking forward to the competition," she said. Harry looked at her. "Really? Tell her that, and also that the bond description in the 3rd paragraph is the most accurate thing anyone not in possession of 4 years of research has said about it." She handed the letter back. "And write back yourself this time. She wrote to you." He looked at the letter. She watched him consider it, the particular considering he did that was never indecision but was always strategy, working out the best approach to a thing. "What do I say?" "The truth," she said. "She'll know if you don't." He wrote back that evening, in the common room, while Ron was losing at chess to himself and Hermione was on her 3rd essay of the week. He didn't ask her to check the letter, which she respected. He sealed it and sent it with his owl. Through the bond, from the direction of France, she felt the warm resistant pulls shift slightly, not resistance releasing exactly, but the direction of it changing. Like someone turning to face a thing they'd been facing away from. She pressed her thumb to her wrist and thought, good. Third year was Dementors on the train and a new defense teacher and a secret that Hermione was keeping about time in a way that made Harry watch her more carefully than usual, which she noticed and acknowledged with the expression she used for not yet, but I will tell you. He didn't push. She would tell him when it was relevant. The Dementors were something else. He'd read about them, of course. Hermione had included a page in her notes. Daphne had mentioned them in November as part of a broader political observation about the ministry's choices in using them to guard the school. He thought he understood what they did. He'd been wrong about that. The one on the train hit him before he saw it coming, the cold first, the cold that went deeper than temperature, and then the sound, which he hadn't expected, which was the worst part, a high terrible voice saying not Harry, please not Harry, and the green light, always the green light at the edge of everything. And then he was on the floor of the compartment, and Hermione was next to him and Ron was white-faced, and the new professor was standing in the door with a bar of chocolate and a look on his face that was both kind and unsurprised. Harry ate the chocolate. He felt the warmth come back slowly. He looked at the window, where frost had crystallized on the glass in the shape of something reaching. Hermione's hand was on his arm. She didn't say anything, which was the right choice. Through the bond he felt Daphne, sharp, present, alarm arriving and being immediately contained, cycling into that deep steady watchfulness. She was in the Slytherin compartment 3 cars back. He thought toward her, fine. Dementor on the train. Fine. Her response was a long still beat, then, I know. I felt it. Something else beneath that, deeper than the words, something like, you are not alone in this. He breathed out. I'm all right, he said, mostly to Hermione, who tightened her hand briefly on his arm and then let go. Lupin, who was Remus Lupin, who turned out to matter in ways that took until Halloween to become clear, taught defense with a quality Harry had not encountered in a teacher before. He treated the students as capable. Not as children to be protected from complexity, not as vessels to be filled with approved information, but as people who could be brought into honest engagement with the subject. Harry responded to this instinctively. He'd been capable for years in situations where nobody had assumed he would be and had simply gotten on with it. Having an adult who assumed competence from the outset was something different. He was also one of the only people in the school who could produce a corporeal Patronus by November, which Lupin told him was remarkable, and which he filed without particular surprise because by third year he developed a fairly realistic assessment of what he was relative to people his age, and being surprised by his own abilities had become less and less a feature of his experience. Hermione could also produce one. It was an otter, which was perfectly and exactly her. She had, when it appeared for the first time, looked at it for 3 full seconds and then said, "Of course it is." Then she'd looked at Harry's stag and something had crossed her face that she'd filed before he could identify it. Fleur crossed the Channel in April. Not for the school year, not yet. That was a year away. She came because she told her parents she was visiting a pen pal in London and then corrected that to 2 pen pals and then, when pressed, to a bond I've been managing at distance for 3 years and I need to meet the person in it before I meet him in a formal school context because I prefer to have evaluated a situation before being evaluated in it. Her mother had looked at her with the expression she reserved for Fleur's more honest moments, proud and slightly tired and completely unsurprised. She arranged it through Hermione, who arranged everything worth arranging, and it happened in Hogsmeade on the 2nd Saturday of April, which was a visit weekend. Harry and Hermione walked down from the castle in the April morning. Daphne walked down separately because she had, as she always had, been thinking about the geometry of things and had decided that meeting Fleur in the middle of Hogsmeade in a group was less efficient than meeting her in Madame Pudefoot's, which was cloying and popular with couples and therefore unlikely to contain anyone from the Slytherin table who would make note of her presence. Madame Pudefoot's, 10 o'clock. Harry and Hermione arrived first. Daphne was already there, sitting with tea and the expression she wore in public, cool, contained, present in a room without being of it. Then Fleur Delacour walked in. She was 12 and already had the particular quality that she would have at 17 and 40 and 80, the quality of someone who had made an agreement with a room to let her fill it, and the room had accepted. Silver blonde, silver gray eyes, the Veela inheritance worn with the ease of someone who had decided it was simply part of her weather rather than her identity. She walked in and stopped and looked at all three of them, and the mark on Harry's shoulder flared hot enough that he felt it through 2 layers of clothing. She looked at Harry first. He looked back. They'd been in each other's peripheral awareness for 3 years. He knew her the way you know a voice through a wall, the warmth and the resistance and the specific pride of her, and seeing the face that went with it was strange and not strange at all, the way recognized things are always already familiar. She crossed the room and sat down across from him. "Potter," she said. "Delacour," he said. Something crossed her face. She'd expected something different from his tone and was recalibrating, and he watched her do it with the competence of someone who'd been doing it all her life. She looked at Hermione. "Granger. Your English translations are very clean." "Thank you," Hermione said. "Your English letters have been getting more relaxed since February. I noticed." Fleur's eyes narrowed slightly. Not anger, the look of someone who had been accurately observed and found it more interesting than irritating. "Daphne Greengrass?" she said, looking at Daphne. "Fleur Delacour," Daphne said. The mutual appraisal lasted 2 seconds and then both of them settled, which Harry thought was either a very good sign or the opening move of something extremely complex. Tea arrived. Fleur wrapped her hands around the cup and looked at the table and then, with the air of someone who had prepared something and was going to say it regardless of the awkwardness. "I have been difficult about this," she said. "The bond. I have resisted it, which you all know because it is apparently legible, and I want to explain." "You don't have to," Harry said. "I know I don't. I am choosing to." She met his eyes. There was something in her gaze that was undefended in a way that he suspected very few people saw. "I am a Veela heir. People have decided things about me my whole life, what I am, what I want, what I will do. The bond appeared when I was 9 and said, 'Here is something about you that is already decided.'" She paused. "I found that very difficult." "I know," Harry said. She looked at him. "How?" "Because I spent 10 years being told what I was by people who'd decided before they knew me." He held her gaze. "The bond didn't decide for you. It found something that was already true." She was very still for a moment. The tea steamed between them. Hermione was writing nothing, which meant she decided this was a people moment, and had left her notebook in her bag, which was significant. "That is," Fleur said carefully, "either the most perceptive thing anyone has said to me about this, or you are very practiced at saying exactly the right thing." "Could be both," Daphne said from behind her teacup. Fleur looked at Daphne. Something shifted, a recognition between them, the specific recognition of 2 people who have both learned to be strategic and find each other's strategy legible. "You're funny," Fleur said with surprise in it. "Rarely," Daphne said. "Only when I mean it." Fleur looked at Hermione. "And you?" "Terrifyingly prepared," Hermione said. "And genuinely glad you're here." She said it without sentimentality, just as a fact, and it landed the way facts landed with Hermione, solid and undeniable. Fleur was quiet for a moment. She turned her teacup in her hands. Then she looked at Harry again. "The bond," she said. "I can feel you through it, all of you, but you most of all. Since September you have been different. Something happened at the start of this year, and then something happened in February." "The chamber," he said. "And before that, something else." "Tell me," he told her. "Both things, the diary, the basilisk, the chamber sealed." He told it plainly without the version that made it sound more or less than it was. She listened the way she did everything, fully present and giving nothing back yet, and when he finished she was quiet for a beat. "You spoke to the basilisk," she said. "Yes." "And it left?" She looked at him with an expression that was finally, fully, unguarded. "Not in love," He didn't read it as that, and it wasn't that, not yet and maybe not ever in the conventional sense, but in recognition. In the drop of a defense that had been held for 3 years because the thing it was defending against had turned out to be exactly what she'd suspected it might be, and that was somehow more dangerous than if it had been something she could keep out. "All right," she said, quietly. "Just that." "All right," Hermione said. "All right." She looked at the table. Then at the three of them. "I am here. I will be here, next year, the tournament. I will write more." She paused. "And I will stop resisting it." "You can resist it," Harry said. "If you want." She looked at him. "Don't be deliberately kind to me, Potter. I won't know what to do with it." Something almost smiled in his face. "Noted," Daphne said. "Welcome to the group." "There is a group?" Fleur said. "There is now," Daphne said. "The full activation happened in June. Not in school. In the grounds, on the last night of third year, which had a particular charged quality that Harry had been feeling through the bond all day, Hermione's time thing reaching its conclusion, the Dementor situation reaching its resolution, and underneath both of those something that had been building since April. He was at the edge of the lake at midnight, which was where he went when he needed to think without the castle around him. The giant squid moved somewhere in the deep, visible occasionally as a darker dark. The forest was still. The ground smelled like spring and the cold that came off the lake. He felt the bond flare. All three simultaneously, which was unusual. Not unusual like the chamber, like danger, unusual like something coming into alignment, like 3 compass needles pointing the same direction at once. He felt Hermione, precise and warm and present. He felt Daphne, deep and still and solid. He felt Fleur, across the channel, no longer leaning away. He looked at his marks. The one on his wrist was bright, brighter than he'd seen it since his 7th birthday, the same gold quality, the same pulse with his heartbeat. The one on his shoulder he could feel through his shirt, warm and steady. The one over his chest he pressed his palm against, and felt it beat back. Something old opened its eyes. He felt it the way he'd felt it on his 7th birthday, not as a threat, as a recognition. The ancient magic in him, the love protection that had turned Voldemort's curse into a scar and kept him alive, stirred and looked at the bond and said yes. This is what this is for. The marks went bright all at once, gold light visible through his shirt, through his sleeve, and the lake reflected it back, and for a moment he stood at the edge of the waterlet from within and felt all 3 of them, all 3 of the people who were his in this specific and unprecedented way, feel it too, wherever they were. Hermione in the castle. Daphne in the Slytherin dormitory. Fleur in France waking from sleep and sitting up and pressing her hand to her shoulder. Then it settled. The brightness dimmed to the usual glow, warm and ambient, and the lake went back to being the lake, and the grounds were quiet around him. But something was different. Something had settled, like a joint finding its socket, like a key turning completely. The bond was, complete wasn't the right word, because it had always been complete. Activated. Like an instrument that had been tuned but not yet played, and someone had finally drawn a bow across a string. Through the bond, from all 3 directions, awareness. Not words. The shape of waking up. He stood at the lake for another hour and felt the castle breathe around him and felt 3 people who were not physically here and felt the ancient magic that lived in him warm and steady and certain, the way it had been certain in the mirror of Eris when it had shown him 3 lights and nothing else. He looked at his left wrist. He thought of Hermione on a platform with a trolley and a notebook and sandwiches. He thought of Daphne across a library with steady gray eyes and a note placed with the precision of someone who'd planned the angle of approach. He thought of Fleur and Madame Pudafoots saying all right with her hands around a teacup, and meaning it. He pressed his palm over his heart. Not afraid. Not pretending not to be afraid. Actually, genuinely not afraid. Standing at the edge of the deepest lake in Scotland in the dark of a June midnight, lit faintly by marks that hadn't existed before his 7th birthday, and now were as much his body as his hands, as much him as the green eyes that were his mother's and the magic that had saved his life. Somewhere above him, a window glowed in the castle. Hermione's dorm, probably. She'd be writing, probably. He thought toward her, it's done. Not the time thing, though that was done too, but this. Whatever had just happened at the lake. It's done. Her response came back warm and immediate, I know. I felt it. Go to sleep. He looked at the lake one more time. Then he went to bed. The morning the Hogwarts Express left for the summer, Daphne passed him in the entrance hall in the flow of students heading toward the carriages, and she slowed as she reached him, and she looked at him, and she said very quietly, Next year she'll be here. I know, he said. She nodded once. Then, doing something he hadn't seen from her before and which she clearly hadn't planned, she reached out and briefly, precisely, pressed her hand over his wrist, over the mark, and then she was past him and walking toward the Slytherin carriages with her back straight and her composure perfectly in place. He stood in the entrance hall for a second. Ron walked into him from behind and said, Sorry, mate, why'd you stop? Without waiting for an answer, and Harry started walking again and felt the mark on his wrist warm where her hand had been. Hermione fell into step beside him. She'd seen it, she saw most things. She said nothing. The carriages rolled down the drive and the express was at Hogsmeade Station and the summer opened up ahead of them, and behind all of it, under everything, the band hummed, 4 people, 1 center, something old and alive and fully awake. Ready now for what came next. Chapter 5. The Wizengamot plays its hand. The summer before 4th year was the summer Lucius Malfoy made his move. Harry found out about it the way he found out about most things that happened in wizarding politics, through Daphne, who found out through her father, who found out through his network of carefully maintained relationships with people who owed him favors, information, or both. Cyrus Greengrass collected debts the way other men collected art, patiently, with an eye for value, and with the absolute intention of one day cashing them in. The letter arrived at the Dursleys in July, redirected through Hermione, who had set up a discreet forwarding arrangement through her parents' postal address because Harry's mail at Privet Drive was subject to Vernon's moods, and Vernon's moods were not a variable she was willing to factor into critical information delivery. Daphne's handwriting was small and precise. She never used more words than necessary. Lucius Malfoy has submitted a formal petition to the Wizengamot under Regulation 1962, Section 7, requesting mandatory review and dissolution of a trisol bond affecting a minor ward of the British Ministry. He has named you as the central figure. He has not named me. He appears unaware of France. The petition has been accepted for preliminary hearing, date not yet confirmed but expected before the school year begins. My father knows about the petition. He has not yet decided his position. You need a legal advocate who is not Dumbledore. I have identified a name, Barnabas Cuff's former wife, now Solicitor Eugenia Marchetti, who practices magical bond law out of Edinburgh and has never lost a Wizengamot case involving personal magical rights. She does not like Lucius Malfoy. I can arrange an introduction if you want it. One more thing. The petition cites ministry authority over you as an orphaned ward. This is the lever. If you were not a ward of the ministry, if you had a legal guardian withstanding, the petition loses its primary basis. Think about that. Harry read it twice, sitting on his bed in the cupboard, well, in his actual room now, the second bedroom, which he'd been moved to 4 years ago, when the marks appeared and the Dursleys had decided that whatever was happening with him was better kept at arm's length. He thought about what Daphne had written. He thought, Dumbledore made me a ward of the ministry. He thought, that was always the plan, wasn't it? The blood protection at Privet Drive, the ministry guardianship, all of it was architecture, and he was living in it without having been asked about the design. He sent a reply to Daphne, yes. Arrange the introduction. And get me everything you can about the guardianship structure, and who signed what. Then he wrote to Hermione, because Hermione was the person you wrote to when you needed someone to be extremely focused and completely unafraid of complexity. Her reply came the next morning. It was 4 pages and the 4th page was a list. They met Eugenia Marchetti in Edinburgh on the 14th of July, which required Harry to invent a dentist appointment for the Dursleys and Hermione to tell her parents the truth and Daphne to tell her father she was visiting a school friend, which was technically accurate, and which Cyrus Greengrass accepted with the look of someone who was allowing more rope because he was interested in what his daughter would do with it. Marchetti's office was on the third floor of a building on the Royal Mile that looked like a solicitor's office from the outside and was, on the inside, the most organized space Harry had ever been in outside of Hermione's notebooks. Every surface had exactly what it needed on it. The woman herself was 60, small, with silver hair and the particular quality of attention that belongs to people who have spent decades listening to what isn't being said. She looked at the three of them across her desk, Harry and Hermione and Daphne, who had traveled separately and arrived first, and was already seated when they got there, and said, "Which of you read the regulation?" "I did," Hermione said. "All 14 subsections and the relevant Wiesengemot precedents back to 1843. Marchetti looked at her. Then at Harry. "And you?" "Hermione's summary," Harry said. "Plus what Daphne compiled on the guardianship structure." She looked at Daphne. "And you compiled the guardianship structure?" "Yes," Daphne said. "The Ministry's guardianship authority over Harry derives from a 1981 instrument signed by Albus Dumbledore, countersigned by the then Minister Millicent Bagnold, and registered with the Wiesengemot Clerk's Office under emergency provisions. It has never been reviewed or renewed. Under standard guardianship law it should have been reviewed at age 7, which didn't happen, and again at 10, which also didn't happen." She paused. "It's irregular." Marchetti picked up her quill. "Irregular enough to challenge. Irregular enough to dissolve," Daphne said. The solicitor looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating their expectations of a 13-year-old. "If the guardianship instrument is dissolved, the Ministry loses its stated basis for the petition. But Malfoy's lawyers will argue the bond itself provides grounds regardless of guardianship status, under public interest provisions. The public interest provisions require demonstrable harm or threat to the wizarding community," Hermione said. "The bond has existed for 7 years. There's no documented harm. I have comprehensive notes on every incident in which Harry has used the bond's associated abilities, and in every case the outcome was protective rather than harmful." "You documented." Marchetti stopped. "How long have you been documenting?" "Since the day the mark appeared on my wrist," Hermione said. 4 years of field notes." Marchetti set down her quill. She looked at the three of them. Then she said to Harry, "You haven't said much?" "They know more about this specific area than I do," Harry said. "I'm better in situations that require doing something than situations that require knowing something. And the Wiesengemot hearing is a doing situation? It will be, if we do this right." He met her eyes. "Can you win this?" She was quiet for a moment. "Define win." "Malfoy's petition fails. The guardianship instrument is dissolved. The bond and everyone in it is legally recognized as beyond Ministry jurisdiction." He paused. "And Lucius Malfoy leaves the hearing knowing that his leverage over me specifically is gone, and isn't coming back." Marchetti looked at him for a long beat. Then she picked up her quill again. "Yes," she said. "I can win that." She started writing. "I'm going to need everything your young Miss Greengrass has compiled, everything Miss Granger has documented, and a signed statement from each of you including, what was the name in France?" "Fleur Delacour," Harry said. "I'll need hers too." "You'll have it within the week," Hermione said. They had it within 3 days because Fleur's statement arrived before Hermione had even finished composing the request, which Harry suspected meant Fleur had been anticipating this moment for some time and had something prepared. Her statement was in both French and English, legally precise, and ended with a line that Hermione read twice and then read aloud to Harry. "I submit this statement as a party to the bond by my own free will and with complete understanding of its implications. And I note for the record that any magical authority that believes it has the right to dissolve what ancient magic has established between consenting individuals has a profoundly insufficient understanding of how magic works." Harry said. "She's extraordinary," Hermione said. She's right. Then, don't tell her I said that. She'll know through the bond. Hermione paused. Yes. She will. She looked at the statement. I like her. I know, Harry said. I mean it competitively and genuinely, both at once. I know that too. The Hogwarts Express on September 1st had a different quality this year. The castle at the end of the journey was different, charged with the particular energy of an event that had been announced and anticipated and turned into an occasion. The Triwizard Tournament. Harry had known it was coming for 2 years, had known Fleur was coming, and still the reality of it landed with a different weight than the anticipation. Hermione sat across from him and Ron in their compartment with a copy of Hogwarts, a history open to the tournament section, not reading it. She'd read it 3 times already, but using it as a prop for thinking. 3 tasks? She said. Traditionally, a creature, a puzzle, a test of will. They've been adaptive historically. Each iteration designs the tasks to the specific participants. She looked at Harry. You're not entering. No. He agreed. Good. She turned a page she hadn't read. Fleur is entering. She has to. Beauxbaton's champion selection is by school vote, and she's won it already, she told me in her last letter. A pause. She was trying to sound neutral about it, but the handwriting got bigger. Harry almost smiled. She's excited. She's competitive. Which is different. She thought for a moment. You should know she's going to be very focused on performing well. She won't want it to look like the bond is helping her. It won't be, he said. She doesn't need it. I know that. Make sure she knows you know that. He looked out the window at the countryside moving past. She'll know, he said. Hermione watched his profile for a moment. She pressed her thumb to her mark, habit now, comfortable, and felt through the bond the particular warmth from the French direction that had changed in quality since April last year, since Madame Pudefoot's and All Right and the full activation by the lake. It was no longer resistance with warmth underneath. It was warmth, openly, with the specific character of Fleur in it, proud and bright and moving forward. Harry, she said. When she arrives. The Beauxbatons' arrival is ceremonial. They're planning a presentation. She'll be in the procession. She paused. Just be normal. He looked at her. What would abnormal look like? I don't know, she said honestly. That's what concerns me. He turned back to the window. I'll be normal, he said, and she felt through the bond the very faint quality that was his version of being amused by a situation, which she'd learned to read over 3 years of careful attention. She filed it as a good sign and went back to her unread page. The Beauxbatons' carriage arrived in October, in the dusk of a cooling evening, a powder-blue flying contraption that descended onto the Hogwarts grounds with theatrical grace and disgorged students in matching robes who moved with the particular synchronized elegance of people who'd practiced the entrance. Harry stood with the Gryffindors on the steps. He felt the mark on his shoulder before he saw her, a specific flare, directional, the shoulder bond responding to proximity the way it did when the distance between them collapsed from channel-wide to the same country to the same grounds. He was ready for that. He'd been feeling it all day, building as the carriage got closer. She came out third in the procession. He saw her and felt the bond complete something it had been holding open since the full activation. Not a new thing, a settled thing, the way a river settles into its full banks after the snow melts. She was 13 and already had the qualities she'd have at any age, and she walked with the ease of someone who had made peace with being noticed. She found him in the crowd with her eyes. Direct. Silver gray and very steady. He looked back. He didn't move. He didn't perform anything. He just looked back with the same directness. She walked past with the procession, maintaining it, because she was professional and she was performing well and those things mattered to her. But as she passed the steps the mark on his shoulder went very warm and he felt through the bond something that was not a word but was unmistakably, I'm here. He thought back simply, I know. Ron, standing next to him, was making observations about Beauxbatons being mostly girls and the girls being extremely good-looking, which was such a round reaction to the situation that Harry found it briefly settling. Hermione, on his other side, said, "She looked at you." "I notice," he said. "The whole procession looked at you, actually, but she looked at you specifically." "Hermione. I'm just noting it for the record." "I know you are." He watched the last of the procession move into the entrance hall. "Come on." They had exactly 3 minutes alone in a corridor off the entrance hall before the welcome feast, because Fleur had the particular gift of navigating group events in ways that created private moments. Harry wasn't sure how she'd arranged it, something to do with the French fourth year, a convenient distraction, and the specific social geography of a crowd, but she appeared around the corner of a tapestry with her composure perfectly in place and the mark on his shoulder very bright. She stopped 2 feet from him. They looked at each other. "Potter," she said. "Delacour," he said. "You are shorter than I imagined." "You're more." He paused, because several things were true simultaneously, and some of them were not things he was going to say in a corridor 30 seconds into meeting her in person for the first time in 2 years. "Exactly what I imagined," he said. Something moved in her expression. That is either a very confident thing to say or a very diplomatic thing to say. "Could be both," he said, which was Daphne's line from Madame Puddifoot's, and he watched Fleur's eyes sharpen because she'd heard that story. He told it, eventually, in a letter, and she recognized it, and something in her face unlocked a fraction more. "Hermione says you are remarkable," she said. She says this in a way that she clearly believes is neutral and analytical and is in fact neither. "She's right about me and I'm right about her," he said. "Same thing." Fleur was quiet for a moment. She looked at his shoulder, or past it, at the mark under his shirt, which she couldn't see but clearly could feel the way he could feel hers. Then she looked at his face. "The hearing," she said. "The Wiesengemot. Marchetti wrote to my father." "I know. Your father's cooperating. He is thorough about protecting our interests." She said it carefully. "He is less. He finds the British ministry's attitude toward the bond presumptuous. The French minister has a different position on ancient magic rights." A pause. "He would like to submit an international legal objection if the British hearing goes badly." "Tell him thank you," Harry said. "And that I don't plan for it to go badly." She looked at him. Confident. Marchetti is very good and Daphne compiled everything and Hermione documented everything. Lucius Malfoy is walking into a room full of things he doesn't know we have. He met her eyes. "It won't go badly." She studied him for a beat. Then, "The tournament. You're entering." "I will be champion." She said it without arrogance, the same way he'd say he was good at defense. "Assessment, not performance." "The tasks? I am prepared. I want you to know I am not using the bond." "I know. I want to win because I am the best witch in the competition." "I know that too." She looked at him. "You are very." She stopped. "Certain?" he offered. "I was going to say agreeable." She said it like it surprised her. "I was prepared for you to be." She paused. "The bond is ancient magic. I expected you to act as though that gave you. It doesn't give me anything," he said. "It's not mine. It's ours." He held her gaze. "Same way it's not yours, it's ours. All 4 of us. Nobody owes anyone anything inside it." She was still for a moment. The corridor was quiet around them, voices from the great hall muffled and distant. "Bien," she said softly. "Just that." But he felt through the bond the quality of it, not the Madame Puddifoot's all right, which had been a beginning. This was something further in. Something that had measured the distance, and decided to close it. "Welcome to Hogwarts," he said. She almost smiled. "Do not be charming, Potter. I have already said I will not know what to do." "You'll figure it out," he said. "You figure everything out." She looked at him for one more moment. Then she straightened, arranged her composure, and walked back toward the entrance hall. He fell into step beside her. Not behind, not ahead. Beside. Through the bond, From Hermione's direction, she was already in the great hall. He felt warm attention, and the faint competitive genuine warmth she'd described when talking about Fleur, and underneath it, something that was simply good. The Wizengamot hearing was set for the 28th of October. It occupied the week before it in a specific way, not with obvious preparation, because Marchetti had been clear that visible preparation was a vulnerability, but with the particular focused energy of people who know exactly what they're walking into. Hermione had her notes, organized by argument and counterargument. Daphne had her compiled information on the guardianship irregularities and the personal files of 7 Wizengamot members whose positions were uncommitted and who her father had identified as persuadable. Her father, it turned out, had made his decision about his position. He'd told Daphne the week before she left for Hogwarts in a conversation that she relayed to Harry through the bond in careful pieces. I have looked at this from every angle my experience provides, and I cannot find the angle from which opposing it serves the Greengrass interests. More to the point, and here Cyrus Greengrass had paused in the way of a man choosing his words with precision, I cannot find the angle from which what Malfoy is attempting is anything other than an attempt to own something that is not his to own. I find that objectionable. Harry had read that, and said nothing for a moment. Then, he's more than I expected. Daphne, through the bond, had given him the impression of something dry. He usually is, she'd said. The morning of the 28th, Harry, Hermione, and Daphne arrived at the Ministry of Magic through the visitor's entrance, a telephone box on a London street, which Harry had never used before but which Hermione had researched and which Daphne navigated with the ease of someone who'd been doing it since childhood. Marchetti met them in the atrium, already in legal robes, and looked the 3 of them over with the brisk assessment of someone checking equipment before a procedure. You look appropriately serious, she said. Mr. Potter, I need you to understand something before we go in. Tell me, Harry said. You will be the target of considerable scrutiny in that chamber. Some members will be looking for reasons to rule against you regardless of the legal argument. Your age, your guardianship status, your famous name, all of it will be used. She met his eyes. I need you to be exactly what you are. Not less. Not performed. Exactly what you are. He looked at her. That's never been a problem for me, he said. She almost smiled. Good. She looked at Daphne. Your father is already inside. He sent word this morning that he's formally seconded by 3 members of the Wizengamot he considers reliable. That's more than I expected from him. He has strong feelings about things being owned that aren't for owning, Daphne said. They walked through the atrium. Hermione fell into step beside him with her folder of documentation and her face in the expression she had for situations that required her to be absolutely precise, and she was absolutely prepared to be. He felt her through the bond, focused, steady, slightly excited in the way she got excited about problems she'd prepared for thoroughly. He thought, good. Use it. She glanced at him. Felt the thought. Straightened her folder and walked faster. Courtroom 10 was underground and circular, and had the specific weight of a room that had held many important and many unjust things and made no distinction between the two. The Wizengamots sat in tiers around the central floor, 50-odd witches and wizards in plum-colored robes, with the chief warlock at the top, and the minister's representative at his right hand, and at the far edge of the second tier, Lucius Malfoy in his seat with his cane and his perfect composure and his eyes that found Harry the moment he walked in and stayed there. Harry looked back at him. He sat down in the chair in the center of the floor, which had chains on it, which he noted and which did not move to bind him, which he also noted, and looked up at the Wizengamot and felt the room. It was a room full of people who were used to power and had various relationships with justice. He'd expected that. He'd thought about it. Cyrus Greengrass was in the 3rd tier, which was higher than Harry had expected. He was a lean, silver-haired man with Daphne's gray eyes and the same quality of contained watchfulness. When Harry found him, he gave the very smallest nod, which Harry returned. Marchetti opened for them. She was extraordinarily good. Harry had suspected it from the Edinburgh meeting, and the hearing confirmed it. She laid out the legal argument in the order she and Daphne had built it: the guardianship instrument first, its irregularities and its failure of mandatory review, the legal standing of Malfoy's petition evaporating at its base before she'd even addressed the bond itself. Malfoy's advocate, a florid man named Selwyn who clearly considered himself the superior legal presence in the room and was clearly wrong, pushed back on the guardianship argument with the Ministry's authority under emergency provisions. Marchetti produced 3 precedents from the past 60 years in which emergency guardianship instruments were ruled invalid for failure of mandatory review. The Wisengamot murmured. Then Selwyn pivoted to the public interest argument, and this was where it got interesting. He built a picture of the Tri-Soul Bond as a destabilizing magical force, unprecedented, uncontrolled, concentrated in a minor who was also the subject of an unresolved prophetic threat. He used words like volatile and unpredictable and an unknown magical variable in an already unstable situation. He was smooth. He was persuasive. He was looking at the uncommitted members when he said it. Harry looked at those members too. Marchetti responded with Hermione's documentation. 4 years of recorded incidents. Hermione had been called as a witness, and she stood in the center of the floor next to Harry with her folder, and answered questions with the precision of someone who had literally been taking notes, for the purpose of answering exactly these questions, and the picture that emerged from her documentation was not volatile and unpredictable. It was methodical, protective, and consistently oriented toward preventing harm rather than causing it. Selwyn tried to challenge the documentation's credibility. Hermione looked at him with the expression she reserved for arguments she found intellectually insufficient, and said, in a voice that carried clearly through the circular chamber, "I can cite the date, time, location, and observable outcome of every incident in this record. Can you challenge any specific entry, or only the record in general?" He challenged in general. The Wisengamot murmured again, differently this time. Then Daphne stood up from the gallery. She hadn't been called as a witness. She was 13 and she was in the Wisengamot building not as a party to the hearing but as the daughter of a member, and she stood and said in a clear, carrying voice, "Chief Warlock, I request permission to address the chamber as a material party to the bond under review." The Chief Warlock, a woman in her 70s named Griselda Marchbanks who looked like she'd seen everything twice, looked at Daphne with the attention of someone registering a surprise and deciding it's worth pursuing. "On what basis, Miss Greengrass?" "On the basis that the petition for dissolution references an unnamed second British party," Daphne said. "I am that party. I submit that any proceeding seeking to dissolve a magical bond without the informed participation of all bond members is procedurally deficient, and any ruling resulting from it is voidable." She produced, from her robes, a prepared statement. She'd known she was going to do this. Harry had known she was going to do this. She told him through the bond at 6 that morning, precise and calm, "I'm going to speak. Have Marchetti ready." He told Marchetti in the atrium, who had taken it in and said, "Resourceful child," and rearranged her notes. The chamber erupted. Selwyn objected on multiple grounds simultaneously. Marchetti submitted that Miss Greengrass's point was legally sound and requested she be formally recognized. Cyrus Greengrass, in the 3rd tier, was utterly still in the way of someone who had known his daughter was going to do something and was waiting to see if it was as good as he'd expected. Marchbanks let the noise run for 30 seconds and then silenced it with a gesture. She looked at Daphne. "You are aware of the implications of publicly identifying yourself as a bond party?" "Yes," Daphne said. "Including the social and political implications for your family?" "Yes." She paused. "My father made his position clear to me this morning. He said that some things are worth the implications." Marchbanks looked at Cyrus Greengrass in the 3rd tier. He inclined his head. She looked back at Daphne. "You may address the chamber," she said. Daphne spoke for 6 minutes. She was not passionate, she was precise, which was more effective. She described the bond as she'd experienced it for 7 years, its nature, its quality, what it was and what it wasn't. She addressed the petition's framing directly. The petition describes the bond as volatile and unpredictable. I have lived with it for 7 years. What I can tell this chamber is that it is the most stable, consistent, and freely chosen element of my magical life. She paused. It found something true. That is all ancient magic ever does. It does not compel. It does not coerce. It reveals. She picked up her prepared statement. I am submitting, formally, as a voluntary party to the bond, my opposition to the petition for dissolution. I am further requesting that this chamber note for the record that the petition was submitted without the knowledge or consent of any bond party and that the material interests of those parties have not been represented in the initial filing. She set the statement on Marchetti's table. I yield to the chief warlock. She sat back down. The chamber was quiet in the specific way of a room that has heard something it can't ignore. Harry, in the chair in the center of the floor, looked at Daphne in the gallery. She looked back at him. Nothing in her expression, nothing that the room could read. But through the hard bond, the deepest one, she gave him the impression of something she rarely gave anyone. Something simple and complete. We are all in this together, it said in a language that wasn't words. Now they know it. Selwyn made a last attempt. He pivoted to the unregistered bond member in France, attempting to argue that an incomplete bond identification made the bond itself procedurally irregular. Marchetti produced Fleur's statement, which she'd submitted formally upon entering the building that morning. She also produced a letter from the French Minister de la Magie, Fleur's father's work, Harry suspected, formally recognizing the bond under French magical law and expressing the French ministry's interest in any attempt by the British ministry to dissolve an internationally recognized magical instrument. Selwyn looked at the letter. He looked at Marchetti. He looked at Lucius Malfoy in the second tier. Malfoy was still. He had the composure of someone who had committed to a position and was writing it out, but something in his face had changed, something that Harry recognized from the library in first year, from Warrington in the third-floor corridor, from Quirrell backing away in the mirror room. The specific expression of someone who had walked into a situation expecting to be the one holding all the information and had discovered they were not. Harry met his eyes. He didn't do it to provoke. He did it because Lucius Malfoy had submitted a legal petition to dissolve something that was Harry's, had attempted to use Harry's orphan status as a lever, had built a mechanism of control disguised as concern, and the least Harry could do was look at him directly when it failed. Malfoy looked away first. The chief warlock called for a vote. It was not close. 31 to 12, with 9 abstaining, the petition was denied. The guardianship instrument was separately referred to the Magical Law Office for review, which Marchetti told him afterward was the legal equivalent of a referral to a committee that would recommend dissolution within the month. They walked out of courtroom 10 and into the corridor, and the door closed behind them and Hermione exhaled with the full force of breath she'd been managing for 3 hours. Daphne arrived from the gallery a moment later and stood in the corridor and looked at Harry. Well, Marchetti said, gathering her documents. That went exactly as I told you it would. You're very good, Daphne said. I know. She snapped her case closed. Don't put yourselves in a position where you need a lawyer again for at least 5 years. I'm expensive. She walked away. Harry watched her go. Then he looked at Hermione, who was pressing her hand against her wrist, not the mark, over it, and Daphne, who was already back in her composure but whose gray eyes were very alive. Through the bond, Hermione said. France. He felt it. Had been feeling it since the vote, Fleur at Beauxbatons, where it was mid-afternoon, who had been feeling the hearing through the bond in real time and whose warmth through the shoulder mark was so bright right now it was almost uncomfortable in the best way. He thought toward her, done. Then, because it was true and she deserved to know it, Daphne stood up in the middle of the Wiesengemot and said we were worth it. A long beat. Then through the bond, from France, something he never felt from her before, something unguarded and warm and entirely without the resistance that had been there from the beginning. Something that said in a language that wasn't words, of course she did. So would I have. He thought, I know. He sent it back. She sent back something that was not quite laughter but was adjacent, surprised by itself, warm. He looked at Hermione. She was watching him with the expression she had when she was feeling through the bond simultaneously, and processing it alongside her own experience of the moment. "She's okay," he said. "Better than okay," Hermione said. "You felt that?" "Yes." She pressed her thumb to her mark. The expression on her face was complicated, many things at once, layered the way Hermione's feelings always were, with the analytical and the personal and the warm all present simultaneously. Then she looked at Daphne. "You were extraordinary in there." "I was accurate," Daphne said. "Which is the same thing in a legal setting." "Your father," Harry said. "He must have known you were going to do it. I told him at breakfast." She paused. He said. She stopped, which was unusual for her. Something moved briefly on her face. "He said the Greengrass family has been neutral for 3 generations because neutral was safe. He said perhaps it's time to be something better than safe." Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then, "I like your father. He's more than people expect," Daphne said. And for just a second she let the warmth through, not performing it, not containing it, just letting it be there in her face. Then it was back in its place and she was straightening her robes and looking at the corridor with the assessing eye of someone choosing their next move. "The dragon task is in 3 weeks," she said. "We should focus on Fleur's preparation." A pause. "I've been watching the other champions. Crumb's approach to the dragon situation will be spectacle. Diggory will be thorough. Fleur's instinct will be elegant." Another pause. "Tell her elegant is fine but efficient is better." Harry thought toward France. Daphne says elegant is fine but efficient is better. The response came back immediately and was clearly Fleur. "Tell Daphne I know the difference." He relayed it. Daphne's mouth did something at the corner. "Good," she said. "She's ready." The dragon task on the 24th of November was, as Daphne had predicted, spectacular in the cases of Crumb and Diggory, and devastatingly efficient in Fleur's case. Harry watched from the stands with Hermione and a crowd of 400 students and teachers and officials, and he felt the shoulder mark flare the moment Fleur walked into the enclosure. She got the common Welsh green. It was not the smallest dragon on the list, but it was the most susceptible to specific charm work, and Fleur had done her research. She put it into a partial sleep with a charm Harry had never seen used on anything larger than a flobberworm, and while it slept she retrieved the golden egg with the unhurried precision of someone who had planned this so thoroughly that surprises were no longer part of the variable set. 9 seconds in the enclosure. Golden egg retrieved. Dragon still mostly asleep when she walked out. The crowd took 3 seconds to process this, and then erupted. Fleur walked back to the champions area with her composure in place, and the egg under her arm and the marks on Harry's body running so warm he had to press his palm against his chest just to ground it. Hermione was writing in her notebook. Harry looked at her. She looked up. "She'll get 10s across the board," she said. "The efficiency and elegance both, none of the judges can penalize her for what she just did." "No," Harry agreed. He thought toward Fleur. Simply, extraordinary. The response was immediate, warm, with the specific Fleur quality of someone receiving a compliment, and deciding they agree with it rather than deflecting. "I know." "How were my scores?" "Not up yet. They'll be 10s. Daphne said so too?" "Daphne is sensible." A pause. "The bond was very warm during the task." "Yes." "Was that distracting?" He thought about it honestly. "No. It was steadying." A longer pause. "Then yes. Me too." He sat back in the stands and felt the winter sun on his face and the bond warm and complete and the crowd still making noise around him, and Hermione riding beside him and Daphne somewhere in the stands. He found her when he looked, sitting with the Slytherin students with her face composed and her hands folded, and she wasn't watching the scoreboard, she was watching Harry. And when she caught his eye she gave him the smallest nod. The one that meant, good. What's next? He looked back at the sky over the stadium. What was next was the second task in February. What was next was the rest of the year, the rest of Fleur's time here, the rest of whatever Lucius Malfoy was going to try now that his legal avenue had collapsed. What was next was Voldemort, who was always out there in the peripheral, never gone, getting less peripheral every month. What was next was everything. He felt three presences in the bond, warm, alive, completely real, and thought, good. I'm ready. Through the bond, from all three directions, the feeling that came back was not doubt. Was not hesitation. Was, simply and completely, so are we. Fleur found him after the scoring, in the corridor outside the champion's tent. She'd come around the long way, which meant she'd chosen this rather than it being coincidence, and she stopped in front of him and looked at his face with the directness that was so entirely hers. Extraordinary, she said, quoting him, with the tone of someone who has decided to let something land. You already knew, he said. Yes. She looked at the egg in her hands. But it is different when someone else does too. She looked up. The bond during the task, steadying, he said. You asked? I did. She was quiet for a moment. I did not expect it to feel like that. Like what? She thought about it. Fleur Delacour choosing her words was a specific and focused process. He'd come to know it through letters first, and now in person, the way her expression went still while she located the precise thing. Like someone standing behind you, she said at last. Not in the way of pushing or pulling. Just present. So you know the space behind you is covered and you do not have to look. He looked at her. The corridor was empty around them, the crowd noise distant from outside. Yes, he said. That's exactly it. She looked at the egg again. Then at him. Something in her expression shifted, and it was the shift he'd first seen in Madame Pudefoot's, the one where the final defense came down and left something that was simply her, without the performance of pride or the armor of resistance. I did not want to be here, she said, when the mark appeared. I was 9 and I did not want something deciding things for me. She met his eyes. I am still not someone who wants things decided for her. I know, he said. But I chose this, she said. I want that understood. Not the bond was always there. I am choosing to be here. With all of you. That is mine. He held her gaze. I know the difference, he said. It matters. She looked at him for one long moment. Then, doing something she probably wouldn't have done in front of an audience, she reached out and briefly, precisely, touched the shoulder, his right shoulder, where her mark was, with 2 fingers. The same way Daphne had touched his wrist at the end of 3rd year. Contact. Acknowledgement. The mark flared warm once under her touch. Bien, she said softly. Then she straightened and picked up the egg properly and walked back toward the champion's area, and he stood in the corridor and felt all 4 of them, the bond complete and warm and running like a current through the deep of the world, and thought, we're not done. We're barely started. But we're ready. He walked back to the stands. Hermione handed him her notes on Fleur's task without looking up. He took them. Somewhere in the stadium Daphne was already thinking about what came next. The tournament was half done. The world outside was shifting, moving, Voldemort somewhere on the periphery getting less peripheral. Harry Potter walked through the November afternoon entirely unafraid. What was coming could come. They'd be ready. Chapter 6. The Ancient King. The graveyard happened in June. Not the way anyone expected it to, not the way the tournament had been designed to end, not the way Dumbledore's careful architecture had arranged the pieces, not the way Voldemort had planned it either, because the thing about plans that are built around a single person is that they fail the moment that person stops being what the plan assumed. Harry had known something was wrong with the 3rd task for 3 weeks before it happened. He'd known it the way he knew most things, not through any obvious signal but through the accumulation of small wrongnesses that individually meant nothing and collectively meant everything. Moody's eyes on him during meals. The maze's particular quality during practice walks, the way the hedges seemed to lean. The bond, which had been running warm and steady since November, developing a specific undercurrent in May that he could only describe to himself as attention, The ancient magic in him, the old protection, going alert in the way it had gone alert in the mirror room in first year. He told Hermione in May. She told him she'd been tracking the same wrongness from a different angle. Moody's behavior, the maze's enchantment pattern, 3 things that didn't add up about the tournament's modification from its historical structure. She had notes. Of course she had notes. He told Daphne through the bond. She told him, through the careful language they'd developed over 4 years, that she'd been watching Bartemius Crouch Sr.'s behavior at official functions, had noticed his absence at the 3rd task briefing, and had information from her father about a Death Eater whose fate was recorded as Azkaban but whose Azkaban intake file, which Cyrus Greengrass had accessed through a contact in the Department of Mysteries, contained a date discrepancy of 9 months. He told Fleur. She told him she'd been feeling it through the bond since April and had chosen not to mention it because she thought she was being paranoid, and then she decided she wasn't being paranoid, and she was going to tell him that evening before he'd written to her first. The 4 of them knew something was wrong with the maze. They couldn't prove it. They couldn't stop the task. What they could do was prepare. Harry spent the 2 weeks before the 3rd task doing things nobody saw him doing because he'd gotten good at that, practicing specific spells with Hermione in the room of requirement that appeared when you needed it, which Harry had discovered in February and shared with nobody except the 3 of them. Reviewing everything Daphne had compiled about Death Eater techniques and dark spellbreaking. Working with Fleur on a communication method through the bond that was more directed than anything they'd achieved before, not words, but intent precise enough to function as instruction in real time. They built, in those 2 weeks, a system. On the morning of the 3rd task, Hermione handed him a piece of parchment with 17 notes on it, then took it back, burned it, and said, "You know all of this already." "Yes," he said. "I just needed to write it down." "I know." He looked at her. She was doing the thing where she was being precise because the alternative was being afraid, and he'd learned to meet that with steadiness rather than reassurance because she found steadiness more useful. "Hermione." When it's done." He paused. "Whatever happens in there. When it's done, we're going to need to move fast." She looked at him. "What do you think is in there?" "A portkey," he said. "Somewhere in the maze. Leading out? Leading to Voldemort. Or to whoever is acting for him." He met her eyes. "Either way, I'm ready." She held his gaze for a long moment. He felt through the bond her careful, precise warmth, the quality that was so entirely Hermione, the way she loved things by understanding them completely, and then refusing to let them be harmed. "I know you are," she said. "I need you to also be ready to come back." "I'm always coming back," he said. She pressed her thumb to the mark on her wrist. "The bond will tell me in real time," she said. "If something happens, I'll feel it." "Yes." "And Daphne will feel it, and Fleur will feel it." "Yes." "So we'll know," she said. "And we'll act accordingly." He nodded. She straightened her notes. Unnecessary, they were already straight, and looked out the window at the maze on the Quidditch pitch, which had been grown over the past months into something large and dark and deliberate. "Come back," she said. Not a request, the way she usually said things that were really requests. A statement of what was going to happen. "Yes," he said. And meant it. He went into the maze at 8 o'clock with 3 other champions, and the bond running warm along all 3 marks like a current. He told the others about the system that morning during breakfast. Fleur had nodded once and touched her shoulder briefly. Cedric Diggory had looked at him with the steady, honest attention that made Cedric, and said, "I believe you, Harry." Without asking for more explanation than Harry had given, Crumb had been quiet for a moment, and then said, "I will be careful," in English, which seemed genuine. The maze was wrong from the beginning. Not in a way that announced itself, in a way that accumulated. The hedges moved differently than they should have. The enchantments on the path markers had been interfered with in ways that were subtle enough to miss if you weren't looking for them specifically. Harry had been looking for them specifically for 2 weeks. He navigated the maze with the particular focused attention that had always been his most reliable tool, not the marks or the bond or the ancient magic, just the careful patient observation of someone who had learned early that paying attention was survival. He avoided 3 traps that he'd identified as additions to the original enchantment structure. He found and reversed an enchantment on the path that would have sent him in circles. He heard Fleur's voice somewhere to his left, once, and felt through the bond that she was all right, navigating, focused, the warm, proud quality of her when she was doing something she'd prepared for thoroughly. The portkey was in the center of the maze. He saw it from 30 feet away, the Triwizard Cup, glowing faintly with magic that had nothing to do with the tournament's enchantment, sitting on a pedestal with the specific shimmer of something that had been modified by someone who was very good at not being noticed. He stopped. He stood 30 feet from it, and looked at it. He could feel the bond. All 3 of them, warm and present and attention focused on him through the real-time connection they'd been building for 2 weeks, following the thread of him through the maze like a signal. He shaped a thought, precise and directed, portkey in the cup. Taking it on purpose. Stay connected. 3 responses, near simultaneous. Hermione, I'm ready. Come back. Daphne understood. I have eyes on the external situation. There are ministry officials who shouldn't be where they are. Be careful. Fleur, I am here. You are not alone in this. He walked forward and picked up the cup. The graveyard materialized around him with the specific wrongness of magic forced into shapes it wasn't meant to hold: dark sky, overgrown grass, the smell of cold earth, and something else underneath it that he recognized from first year in the mirror room, from the diary's cold, from any space that had been soaked through with dark magic for long enough that it had become the texture of the place. Wormtail. A cauldron. A bundle in Wormtail's arms that Harry identified before he was ready to identify it. He moved before Wormtail finished his first instruction. Not toward Wormtail, toward cover, the gravestone nearest to him, because he'd thought about this. He'd thought about what would happen in a graveyard and the tactical geometry of gravestones, and he was behind one before the first spell was cast. The thing in Wormtail's arms said, "Kill despair." The killing curse hit the ground 2 feet to his left. Harry was already moving. He understood, in the next 30 seconds, 2 things simultaneously. First, Cedric was here. He'd been faster to the cup than Harry had accounted for, and they'd touched it together, and the portkey had taken both of them. Cedric was behind a gravestone 15 feet to Harry's right, alive, and Harry felt genuine relief at that, which he also noted as information for later processing. Second, there was not going to be a confrontation on Voldemort's terms. He had approximately 4 minutes before the ritual completed. If Wormtail completed the ritual, Voldemort would have a body, and a body changed the geometry entirely. He came out from behind the gravestone at an angle Wormtail wasn't tracking, because Wormtail was focused on the cauldron, and the spell Harry sent hit the cauldron's base with enough force that the whole thing tilted, and the liquid inside, whatever the ritual required, hit the ground in a wave, and the bundle went into the dirt rather than into the cauldron, and Wormtail screamed something in both fury and panic. 30 seconds. Maybe less. He felt the bond flare, all 3 of them, hard and bright, present and focused. He felt something else. The ancient magic in him, the old protection, responding to the dark presence in the bundle, responding to the dark magic in the ground, responding to everything in this graveyard that was the opposite of what had protected him since he was 1 year old. Not waking. It had been awake since the maze. Rising. He crossed the graveyard at a run and grabbed the bundle from the dirt, and felt the dark magic in it push against his hands. Cold, deliberate. Everything Voldemort was compressed into this fragile and horrible temporary form, and he felt the protection in his blood push back. The pushing back was not gentle. The bundle burned. Not literally, not fire, but whatever dark thing was sustaining Voldemort's temporary form burned in the presence of the ancient magic the way the diary had burned in the presence of Fawkes' breath, the way Quirrell's hand had burned in the mirror room when he touched Harry's face. The same fundamental reaction of a magic that was built to destroy meeting a magic that was built to protect and love and endure. Voldemort, the fragment of him, the piece that had survived and grown and found its way into this horrible patience, screamed. Harry held on. Through the bond he felt all three of them feel it. The ancient magic rising, the push-pull of it, dark and old protection, the sound of Voldemort's scream carrying through the bond like a frequency that didn't need air to travel. He felt Hermione's attention go absolutely sharp, fear and focus fused into something that was purely present. He felt Daphne go very still, that quality she had when something enormous was happening, and she was filing everything precisely because she was going to need it later. He felt Fleur, and this was new, this was something he hadn't felt from her before. He felt her lean through the bond, actively, deliberately, and push. Not her Veela magic. Not any technique. Just herself, deliberate and complete, through the bond, toward him, and the warmth of it hit the marks on his body simultaneously, and the ancient magic responded to it the way it had responded to the bond marks on his 7th birthday, with recognition. With yes. These people. This is what this is for. The protection blazed. Voldemort's temporary form dissolved. Not dramatically, not with the theatrical collapse of a villain in a story. It came apart, piece by piece, the dark magic sustaining it unraveling under the pressure of something it couldn't absorb, and it went into the ground and into the air and into nothing, and the graveyard was suddenly just a graveyard, cold and dark and full of old stones, with the smell of turned earth, and the distant sound of the Hogwarts grounds through the Portkeys one-way connection. Wormtail ran. Harry let him run, which was a tactical choice he'd think about later. Cedric was still behind his gravestone, alive and unhurt, and staring at Harry across the dark grass with an expression that contained no categories for what he'd just seen. "Are you all right?" Harry asked. Cedric's mouth moved. "What?" he said. "Was that?" "Long story." Harry picked up the cup, which still had its Portkey enchantment. "Can you hold on to this?" Cedric grabbed the handle. Harry grabbed the handle. The graveyard fell away. They landed on the Hogwarts grounds outside the maze in a collision of released pressure and night air, and Harry heard the crowd before he could see it, not cheering, confusion, the sound of people who have been watching an empty maze for too long realizing something has happened. He was on his feet before the disorientation cleared, which was something he practiced, transitioning from Portkey arrival to upright and oriented as fast as possible. Dumbledore was already moving toward them from the judge's table, fast, for a man his age, with the particular controlled urgency of someone who had suspected this might happen and was now in the mode of managing what came next. His blue eyes when they found Harry were sharp and assessing and very still. Harry looked at him across 30 feet of Hogwarts grass and thought, "Not yet. Not tonight. I'm not giving you the shape of this yet." "Harry." Dumbledore's voice was controlled warmth. "Are you hurt?" "No." He looked at Cedric, who was being helped up by Amos Diggory, who had come down from the stands in the chaos. "He's not either." "What happened?" "A Portkey in the cup," Harry said. "Taking us to a graveyard. Wormtail was there. Peter Pettigrew, alive, not dead, and a ritual intended to restore Voldemort to a body. I stopped the ritual." He said it simply, without drama, because the simple version was the true version. Voldemort's current form was destroyed. Pettigrew escaped. We came back. The crowd around them had gone very quiet. Not the silence of incomprehension, the silence of people who have heard something land. Dumbledore's eyes had not left his face. "How?" he said carefully. "Did you stop the ritual?" Harry met his gaze. "The same way I've stopped things before," he said. "Does the how matter right now?" A pause. "No," Dumbledore said. "I suppose it doesn't." He looked at Harry for a moment longer with the look Harry had been seeing for 3 years, the looking for the bottom look, and Harry thought, "There is a bottom, but you are not going to find it tonight or any night unless I decide to show you." "The imposter," Harry said. "Moody. There's someone in his place, Polyjuice, I think. Has been all year." Dumbledore didn't blink. "I know," he said. Harry looked at him. "You knew." "I suspected." A pause that was very carefully constructed. I hoped I was wrong. Harry thought, you knew and you calculated it into the plan and the plan had me in the center of it, and you called that acceptable. He thought it very clearly and entirely without anger, because anger was less useful than clarity. Then he filed it and looked at the stands where people were beginning to come down from the seats. He found Hermione immediately. She was already at the edge of the crowd, pushing through it with the focused intent of someone who had been feeling through the bond in real time for the past 40 minutes, and was now closing the physical distance as fast as possible. Daphne was behind her, which meant Daphne had come to find Hermione the moment the bond flared in the maze, and they'd been together at the edge of the stands. He walked toward them. Dumbledore said his name, and he kept walking. Hermione reached him first. She stopped 2 feet away and looked at his face, and the bond was so bright between them that he could see it reflected in her expression. The fear that had been precise and focused all evening releasing into something that was not quite relief because relief implied the danger had passed and they both knew it hadn't, but was something adjacent to it, something warm and real. She grabbed his arm. Gripped it. 1 second. Then let go and stepped back because that was Hermione, the physical thing acknowledged and contained and moved past. You stopped it, she said. Yes. The bond, she said. In the moment, when all 3 of us pushed through, yes. She looked at his hands. Then at his marks. The one on his wrist was brighter than she'd ever seen it in daylight. Harry, she said carefully. What did that feel like? He thought about it honestly. Like standing in a river, he said. And the river knowing you. She was quiet for a moment. That goes in the notes, she said, and he felt through the bond the specific warmth of Hermione when she was covering something very large with something very focused, and he let her do it because that was how she needed this to go. Daphne arrived beside them. She said nothing. She looked at him with those gray eyes and he felt the hard bond, the deepest one, warm and very solid, and she gave him the impression of something that was simply, here. Still here. As expected. He nodded. She nodded. It was enough. Through the shoulder bond, from France where it was very late and Fleur had been awake feeling every second of the maze through the connection, a wave of warmth so complete it was almost physical, followed by something that had words in it, or the shape of words, the closest they'd ever gotten to actual language through the bond. I told you. You are not alone in this. He thought back, I know. Thank you? Her response was warm and fierce and very Fleur. Do not thank me. We do not thank each other for this. He almost smiled. All right. The aftermath had the quality of things that have been building for years finally arriving, which is both relief and new pressure simultaneously, the way a storm that breaks is both resolution and event. The ministry arrived in force by midnight. Cornelius Fudge appeared with 6 auras, and the expression of a man who had been told something he was determined not to believe, and was going to manage his way around it. He looked at Harry with the specific look of someone for whom Harry represented a problem he had not budgeted for. The boy's confused, Fudge told Dumbledore. A traumatic experience, clearly, Cornelius, Dumbledore said. The maze, the darkness, these things can produce, Cornelius. Dumbledore's voice was not raised. It didn't need to be. Peter Pettigrew is alive. I have a witness and I have physical evidence from the graveyard that Harry can identify specifically enough to enable our investigation tonight, if you send your team now. The evidence of a child, the evidence, Harry said, of the person who was there. Fudge looked at him. Harry looked back at him with the steady directness he'd been developing since he was 7, and a cupboard and 3 marks had established that he was not going to spend his life apologizing for existing. He was 14, and he just dissolved Voldemort's temporary body with magic that was older than any law in this building, and Cornelius Fudge was a man who was afraid of the information Harry was carrying because the information required action and action required commitment, and commitment was the thing Fudge had built his career avoiding. Minister, Harry said. Voldemort is not dead. He's not gone. He spent the last 4 years gathering himself, and tonight someone tried to finish the process, and I stopped it, And what you do next determines whether you have time to prepare or whether you spend the next year insisting nothing is happening while it happens." He paused. "I'm 14. I shouldn't be the one explaining this." Fudge's face went through several things. Then he looked at Dumbledore. "The boy needs to be the boy," Dumbledore said, quietly and with precision. "Needs to be listened to. As do I, Cornelius. We have been here before. I am asking you not to choose the same path." The silence lasted long enough to mean something. Then Fudge looked at his Aurors. "Amelia," he said to the woman beside him. Bones, Harry recognized her from Marchetti's files, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the most competent person in the Ministry by Daphne's assessment, and several others. "Take 2 and go to the graveyard. The boy will give you the coordinates." Harry gave them to Madame Bones, who took them with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been waiting for the adults in the room to stop performing and start acting. She looked at him when he finished. "Full report tomorrow. My office, 9 o'clock, with a legal representative present if you want one." "Marchetti," he said. "Edinburgh. Good choice." She was already walking. Dumbledore's office at 1 in the morning. Harry sat in the chair across the desk that he'd sat in many times over 4 years, and Dumbledore sat behind it, and the silver instrument spun, and Fawkes was on his perch watching with his bright eyes, and the portraits of sleeping headmasters maintained their sleep with varying degrees of conviction. Dumbledore looked at Harry across the desk. He looked at the marks, all 3 of them, bright in the lamplight, brighter than they'd been before the graveyard. He looked at Harry's face. "Tell me," he said, "what happened in the graveyard?" "All of it," Harry told him. He told the true version, which was complete, because he'd decided on the walk up from the grounds that Dumbledore needed the complete version and that the decision about what to do with it should be Harry's rather than an accident of incomplete information. He told it plainly, start to finish, and Dumbledore listened the way he did when he was genuinely listening rather than gathering, without the spinning instruments, without the benevolent performance, just an old man hearing something he'd been trying to prevent for 14 years described in matter-of-fact sentences by a 14-year-old. When Harry finished, Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. "The bond," he said finally. "In the moment, when all 3 activated simultaneously, the ancient magic did the work," Harry said. "The bond was the channel." Dumbledore looked at his hands. "I should tell you that I have known, since you were very young, what was in you. The protection your mother left. What it was capable of." He met Harry's eyes. "I did not know it was capable of this." "It surprised me too," Harry said. "The first time." "The first time was not tonight." "No." He held the old man's gaze. "First year. The Mare Room. Coral burned when he touched me." He paused. "You knew that?" "Yes." "And you've been building a plan around it?" "Not accusation, statement. A plan where I'm the mechanism." Dumbledore was very still. "Harry, I'm not angry," Harry said, and meant it. "I understand why you made the choices you made. I even understand that most of them were made because you genuinely believed they were right." He looked at the spinning instruments. "But I'm not a mechanism. And the plan I'm in the center of, the one you've been running since 1981, I need to know what it is. All of it. Not because I'll refuse to do what needs to be done, but because I'm going to be doing it as myself, not as the piece you've been placing." The silence was long and had weight. Fawkes trilled once softly. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. Something moved in his face that Harry hadn't seen before, not the performed warmth, not the strategic kindness. Something older and more tired and, Harry thought, more genuine. "You're right," he said. "You deserve the truth." "Yes," Harry said. "I do." So Dumbledore told him. All of it. The prophecy first, either can live while the other survives, and then the Horcruxes, which he'd suspected but hadn't confirmed, and then the shape of the larger plan, the one built around Harry's survival and Harry's power and Harry's choice, which was the thing Dumbledore had always known mattered but had never quite managed to treat as the primary variable. Harry listened. He didn't interrupt. He filed everything with the same careful attention he'd always used, and when Dumbledore finished he was quiet for a moment. "The Horcruxes," he said. "How many?" "7, I believe. 6 remaining, 1 was destroyed tonight." "The diary," Harry said. "First year." "Fawkes." Dumbledore looked at him. "Yes. I knew it was a Horcrux," Harry said. "I didn't have the word. But I knew what it was." He looked at Fawkes, who was watching him. "Thank you," he said to the Phoenix, meaning all of it, the diary, tonight, the general quality of being an ally when being an ally was genuinely useful rather than performed. Fawkes trilled. Dumbledore said carefully, "The prophecy says you must be the one to. I'll do it," Harry said. "I've always been going to do it. Not because of the prophecy. Because it needs to be done and I'm capable of doing it, and I'm not going to hide from that." He met the blue eyes. "But I'm doing it my way. With the people who are mine. And I'm not going to be managed through it, not by Voldemort, not by you, not by the Ministry." He stood up. "I'll be in Madame Bone's office at 9 o'clock. I'm going to sleep now." He walked to the door. "Harry," Dumbledore said. He stopped. "The bond." A pause. "It is more than I understood. More than anything in the historical record prepared me for." Another pause. "Take care of it." "I don't need to take care of it," Harry said. "It takes care of itself." "That's rather the point." He looked back over his shoulder. "Good night, Professor." He walked out. He went down the spiral staircase and through the castle, and the castle was quiet around him, portraits sleeping, ghosts drifting, the particular nighttime quality of Hogwarts which was still and warm and ancient, and his. It had been his since first year in a way that Privet Drive had never been and Dumbledore's plan had never quite been. His, and Hermione's, and Daphne's, and Fleur's. He walked. The common room at 2 in the morning was empty except for Hermione, who was in the chair by the window where she always sat when she was thinking, with her notebook closed on her knees and Crookshanks in a crushing grip against her chest, which was what she did with the cat when she was processing something difficult and needed a container for her hands. He sat in the chair across from her. The fire was low. The tower was quiet. She looked at him. "Prophecy," she said. "Not a question." "Yes." He looked at the fire. "He told me." "What did it say?" He told her. She listened without moving. When he finished she was quiet for a moment, and then she opened her notebook and wrote something down, which was how she always handled information that needed time. She wrote it, and then she could think around it. He waited. "Horcruxes," she said. 6 remaining. 1 tonight. She wrote that too. Then she put the pen down and looked at him, and he saw in her face the thing she was doing, being precise as a way of being present, using the thing she was best at as the mechanism for the thing she found hardest. "Hermione," he said. "I'm processing," she said. "I know. Take your time." She looked at her notebook. Then at Crookshanks, who bore the scrutiny with feline patience. Then at Harry. 6, she said. "Yes. We'll research the method of destruction. We'll identify the objects. We'll build a systematic approach and we'll do it one at a time." She looked at him steadily. "This is solvable, Harry. I know. It's not quick. It's not going to be this year or next year. But it's solvable," he said. "Yes. I know." She looked at him for a long moment. Crookshanks made a sound that was either protest or agreement. "You're all right," she said. "Not a question." "Yes. You went to a graveyard and yes. And you came back." "I said I would," he said. She looked at him. He saw in her face, very briefly, all 4 years of it, the platform, the sandwiches, the library, the chamber, the lake, Madame Putifoot's, the hearing, every moment that had added up to here, to 2 chairs by a dying fire at 2 in the morning with everything changed and nothing, fundamentally, different between them. "Yes," she said. "You did. She picked up her pen. Fleur lands in 3 months when the school year ends. She'll stay. Her father's already looking at London properties, she told me last week. I know. She told me too. She should be part of the research process. A pause. So should Daphne. Daphne's father has access to ministry archives that we don't. I'll talk to Daphne tomorrow, he said. After the Bones meeting. I'm coming to the Bones meeting. I know. She wrote something else in her notebook. He watched her and felt the bond warm and steady between them, and through it the other two, Daphne quiet and awake in the Slytherin dormitory, already thinking, already planning, the hard bond deep and solid as the foundations of the castle. And Fleur across the channel, not asleep, feeling everything through the connection, the warmth of her fierce and complete, and no longer leaning away from anything. Hermione, he said. She looked up. After all of it, he said. After the Horcruxes and the war and whatever comes next, what do you want? She looked at him for a long moment. This was not the kind of question she was given often. Not because people didn't ask her what she wanted. They did, frequently, about essays and revision schedules and books, but because this kind of question, the open kind with no specified domain, was rarer for her. I want to change the laws, she said. Not just the soul bond regulation, all of it. The creature rights laws, the blood status laws, the ministry's entire framework for who gets to be protected and who doesn't. She paused. I want to do it from inside, which means I need credentials and position, which means I need Hogwarts, and then I need a ministry career, and then I need enough influence to. She stopped. Looked at her notebook. That's a 30-year plan. Good plan, he said. What do you want? She said. He thought about it honestly, which he always did with her because she always did with him. To be done with the thing that was decided for me before I was born, he said. And then to find out what I want when it's actually my choice. She looked at him. Something in her expression, not sympathy, something more precise than that, something that understood the specific shape of what he'd said. Yes, she said. I think that's exactly right. He looked at the fire. She went back to her notebook. The common room was very quiet. Through the bond, in the deep of the night, he felt all three of them, present and real and his, and he was theirs, and the ancient magic in him that had protected him since he was 1 and had found its 3 resonators when he was 7 and had finally blazed in a graveyard tonight ran warm and quiet and content, the way a river runs when it has found its proper banks. Not done. Not even close to done. 6 Horcruxes and a war and a ministry that was going to spend the next year insisting nothing was happening and Voldemort reconstituting himself somewhere and Dumbledore with all his plans and Lucius Malfoy still in the Wizengamot and the whole enormous complicated world still turning. But something had settled tonight. Something had been established in the graveyard and in Courtroom 10 and in Madame Puddifoot's and in the library at Hogwarts and on a platform at King's Cross and in a cupboard under the stairs on a boy's 7th birthday when 3 marks had burned themselves into his skin and the oldest magic in the world had opened its eyes. For people. One center. A bond that the Wizengamot couldn't dissolve and Voldemort couldn't break and Dumbledore couldn't manage and the ministry couldn't regulate, because it wasn't any of their business, because it had existed before any of them made their plans and would exist after every plan had run its course. Morning came through the Gryffindor Tower windows in long pale lines, and Harry was still in the chair by the fire because he'd slept there, and across from him Hermione had also slept in her chair with her notebook in her lap, and Crookshanks had relocated to Harry's knees at some point in the night, and was regarding the room with proprietary satisfaction. He looked at the 3 marks in the morning light. Wrist, shoulder, chest. The same as they'd been since he was 7, and the same as they'd be when he was old, permanent, and warm and alive. He pressed his palm over the one on his chest. Through the bond, warmth, all 3 directions, morning quality, present and awake. Hermione stirring across from him, reaching for her notebook before she was fully conscious, which was extremely her. Daphne somewhere below, already alert, already thinking, the hard bond steady as it always was, deep as the foundations, And Fleur, across the water, the shoulder bond bright with morning, no longer resistant, fully present, already feeling him feel her, and, deliberately, precisely, in the way she did things she decided to do, leaning in. He thought to all three of them, simply, good morning. 3 responses, in 3 different registers that were as familiar to him now as voices. Hermione, warm and immediate, and already containing the day's agenda. Daphne, still, solid, a single beat of acknowledgement that carried everything it needed to. Fleur, bright, fierce, a flash of warmth that was entirely her, proud and open in choosing this, every morning, choosing this. He sat in the chair with the cat on his knees and let the morning come. Outside the tower windows Hogwarts was waking up, the grounds catching the early light, the lake dark and still, the forest at the edge of the world. In a graveyard somewhere in England the Aurors had been working through the night. In the ministry's offices, Fudge was composing something that would describe last night in the most comfortable terms available. In Edinburgh, Marchetti was already aware of the guardianship dissolution order that had been filed while Harry slept. In the world outside all of it, Voldemort was a fragment of himself and a fragment of a plan, and the plan had been interrupted, and he was patient, and he would try again. He would try again. And again. And they would be ready. Because this was the thing about the ancient magic, the thing that Voldemort had been trying to understand since the night he failed to kill a 1-year-old, and the killing curse had simply stopped at the border of something it couldn't cross. It wasn't a power. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't the kind of thing you could study and replicate, and aim at an enemy. It was a fact. The way love was a fact. The way choice was a fact. The way 4 people who had found each other across distance and politics and family and fear and a ministry regulation and a graveyard in the dark were a fact, permanent and warm and entirely, unassailably real. Hermione opened her notebook. She wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. Looked up at Harry with her steady brown eyes. "Ready?" she said. He looked at her. He looked at the 3 marks on his body in the morning light. "Yes," he said. She started writing.